IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's dude is Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are ready to talk some quarterback, Ryan. So you know I'm fired up, man. But in today's show, we're going to kind of break down the 2025 quarterback board, just kind of talk about the latest about what we know, dive into some film of some of the top the top players in 2025. And where things stand. Obviously, we've had some of these kids have been on campus. Notre Dame has been down to see a lot of quarterbacks. Gino Guidugli has been out and about, man, seeing a lot of 2025 quarterbacks. We expect the board to expand over the next couple months if they don't land a commitment. And right now, we don't believe that a commitment is imminent from a 2025 quarterback. One 2025 quarterback is off the board, not just off the Notre Dame board, but off of the 2025 board, that being Cutter Boley, who committed to Kentucky this week and also announced his intention to reclassify to the 2024 class. Big pickup for Kentucky. Guy that was very high on Notre Dame early. Notre Dame had other guys that were priorities, and so he has moved on, and he has chosen Kentucky, Ryan. But look, a couple things are really important here, Ryan. Number one is it's a very important year for Notre Dame when it comes to quarterback recruiting, and this is our first chance to kind of see what Gino Guidugli has to offer as a recruiter of quarterbacks. And number two, this is an absolutely loaded quarterback class already, and Notre Dame has certainly gotten in on some very important players.
Yeah, I mean, and the due diligence, I think, is the biggest part that you start with, right? Is that you've seen it, and if you're on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com, you should go there because I know Brian has been consistently giving you guys a legitimate heads up as far as where Gino Guidugli has been traveling every day during this open period, obviously, of coaches being on the road, but also if you're just on the regular website at irishbreakdown.com, he's been pointing out every morning coaches on the road over the last couple weeks. So Gino Guidugli is one of those guys where he had a board to work with already when he was first brought on to Notre Dame, but he has been doing his due diligence, to say the least. I mean, he's been out in California, he's been in the South, he's been everywhere in between, obviously, at this point. So taking a look at some of the top 2025 quarterbacks that are not only on the board, but also guys that maybe could potentially be added to the board. I mean, we had a nice little note on a player that is from very familiar territory to Notre Dame in the 2023 class in Preston Zinter's high school, that they just went out to take a look at a quarterback, or went to the school of a quarterback, I should say, and to kind of see him work out a little bit. So Gino Guidugli is doing his due diligence on the trail. There's no question about it. He's been really kind of going back and forth and place to place and doing the travels, because I think the one part that we miss about the evaluation process sometimes is that, yes, we watch the film and we get excited, whether you're watching the huddle highlights or whether you're watching some legitimate game film or whether you're watching just some playbacks to games on YouTube. You can see a lot of the things that get you super excited about, the size, the arm strength, the athleticism, all those great components. But Gino has really taken it it's an emphasis on his recruiting process right now is I want to see these guys in person, right? I want to see them throw. I want to talk to their coaches. I want to see what makes them tick, because that really shows how much of development and how much upside a quarterback has, because it's much more than just a physical position. There's a lot of mental fortitude and things that need to go into the conversation there, a football IQ conversation. So we have seen Gino.
And character.
Yes.
Character too. I mean, that's another important part, is you need to make sure you're getting a guy that's going to represent your university well. And that's I would say is as important, if not more so, a quarterback than any other position in football, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, because I mean, the leadership intangibles are something that is the necessity for the quarterback position. So Gino's doing his due diligence. Coach Guidugli is doing his due diligence, seeing a lot of talented kids. And to your point, Brian, after getting Kenny Minchie and having CJ Carr already committed in the 2024 class, Notre Dame's quarterback room in general is trending upwards over the last couple cycles. Oh, yeah. You need to make sure that continues, and you find the right guy to fit into that group, because not every kid, even if they're the most supreme talent of all time, is going to be the right fit into a quarterback room. Yeah. And I think that's what Coach Guidugli, I should say, is trying to find in 2025.
And that's the interesting thing too about it, Ryan, is he's still new to Notre Dame. So how quickly can he figure out, okay, what makes Notre Dame different, and how does it impact who I am or I'm not recruiting to Notre Dame? That's always an important piece of it too. I would say that his relationship with Marcus Freeman is going to help him expedite that process a little bit. But that's always something every coach who's never been at Notre Dame before has to understand is you may have been able to recruit this type of guy at Cincinnati or Wisconsin, but you can't always recruit those same kind of guys at Notre Dame for a host of reasons. And so that part's going to always make for an interesting conversation. But man, he is not short on talented signal callers in this class, Ryan. I mean, it is.
Yes.
It is wild. It's like every time we hear about a kid looking at Notre Dame, you're like, oh, wow, another quarterback. Oh, this is going to be a backup option. You know, probably won't be as excited about this guy as I am other kids in the class. And then you pop in the film and you're like, well, I was wrong. This guy can play. And, you know, we've seen Notre Dame get on the road and see a lot of quarterbacks. As I said before, the board's likely going to expand barring a commitment in the next month or so, which we don't anticipate. But it's coming because they went out and saw a lot of guys. I mean, there was like 2 days I think Coach Gaduli spent on the road looking at 24 and 25 quarterbacks. They've already offered some 26 quarterbacks. Julian Lewis is a kid that offered recently, who's a really talented kid in the 2025 class. There's a couple other new names on the board that you and I are going to talk about today, guys that don't have offers, but guys that Notre Dame is in on, that Coach Gaduli has been out and seen, that are kids I'd honestly, to be completely straight honest with folks, and yes, that is an expression. Doesn't mean I'm lying to you other times. It just means in this instance, I'm trying to stress the importance of this comment. A couple kids I'd never heard of before. I got word of today that, you know, guys that I should keep an eye on. And then I go out and watch them play and you're like, dang it, these kids can play too? Like, you got to be kidding me. This is a really loaded quarterback class, Ryan, and I am very excited to watch it develop. But the thing that's nice about it too is when it's a deep class, it's like last year with Kenny Minchie. Yeah. Kenny Minchie's maybe like the 8th to 10th best quarterback in last year's class. But to me, he's still a top 100 guy. And he was a top 200 guy by almost everybody. But to me, he had a top 100 caliber grade. And he's like the 8th to 10th best quarterback in the class. When you have a loaded class like that, it helps widen the margin for error. It's not a situation where if you miss out on guy A, you're in trouble. For example, if Notre Dame would have missed out on CJ Carr in the 2024 class, it's not as deep of a class. Now, it's a solid quarterback class. Don't get me wrong. There's some good players out there, but it's not nearly as high level or as deep as last year's class, in my opinion, at quarterback. 2025 will be, Ryan. It is an absolutely loaded quarterback class, and Notre Dame is doing their due diligence. And the thing I like about the strategy, even though they're in a good place with a couple really good quarterbacks, they're not taking it for granted, and they're still scouring the nation for other quarterbacks. I think that's a very smart strategy as well. And we're seeing that from this staff in a lot of positions where I actually like where Notre Dame is at, like with Kedron Young right now. But until he commits, they're out there offering new guys. They're going down and seeing Nathaniel Palmer. They're offering Xavier Robinson. They better see him twice this spring. That's smart recruiting. I mean, that's what you want to staff. Don't stop recruiting until you have the reason to do so. And they're certainly doing that in quarterbacks in 2025, Ryan.
Well, I think that a big point too, Brian, is that we talked about, I remember when the whole Dante Moore situation happened in 2023. You remember the aftermath of that was that Notre Dame had to quickly expand the board. They had to figure out who their target list was. And Kenny Minchie was a very fortunate circumstance that happened to Notre Dame, obviously, to get him in the class. But that was one of the situations where you had kind of focused all your eyes on one guy. It was Dante Moore. It was Dante Moore. It was Dante Moore. You drop some guys, you stop recruiting others, and then you get into a little bit of a troubling situation at the end there. I think that you're seeing right now for quarterback recruiting in 2025, especially, and across the class, I would agree with there, is that Notre Dame has several guys that they really like in 2025, excuse me. There's not just one guy. You know that there's obviously only going to be one quarterback in 2025, barring something crazy happening, but you are doing your due diligence and you are keeping the conversations open with a bunch of talented quarterbacks. I mean, I feel like every quarterback in this class outside of like KJ Lacy is 6'3 plus. Like they're all just massively talented kids. So yeah, I like the operation aspect of it for Notre Dame as far as how they are operating behind the scenes to recruit 2025 quarterbacks. And I also think that you're really pulling from a really talented group. So no complaints for me yet, man. I think Notre Dame's doing a tremendous job for recruiting in 2025.
Last piece too, Ryan, is they're being very open about the style of play. It's very clear again, not a criticism, just an observation. Tommy Rees usually preferred a certain type of quarterback. Now, he didn't mind a guy that was mobile. C.J. Carr's mobile, but C.J. Carr is a pocket quarterback that also happens to be athletic. Whereas, Notre Dame assigned dual threat guys. You look at this board, and there are guys like C.J. Carr that are mobile, athletic pocket passers. There are guys that are more pure pocket passers. The kid that they went out and saw from Massachusetts, we'll talk about, Blake Hebert, who I think that's how you pronounce the name. Could be Hebert. I'm not quite sure, but the only person I know whose name is that way is Hebert, so we're going to go there. But he's a different type of kid. He's not a bad athlete at all, but he's a pocket passer. And then there's guys that are more true dual threats, guys that are very mobile. We'll talk about a kid from Oklahoma that Notre Dame is keeping an eye on. That's a very, very much a dual threat quarterback, a run throw guy that honestly looks more like Avery Johnson than he does CJ Carr. So I do like that too, Ryan, is they're open-minded to the style of quarterback that they're going to go get. They want a talented player, and then they can sort of adapt the offense to fit him. And yes. I think when you're going to run an offense that utilizes RPOs a lot more, that gives you some flexibility with the type of quarterback you're going to bring in, because you can always alter your read concepts in order to fit a guy who may be more of a pure runner. You can adapt to a Tyler Buchner if you need to, right? And then be completely fine going with a Kenny Minchey the next year, because Kenny Minchey and Tyler Buchner are very different players. Tyler Buchner is a legitimate dual threat quarterback. Kenny Minchey is a pocket quarterback who also happens to be a quality athlete. He's not the athlete CJ Carr is, but he's a quality athlete.
Right.
And I do like that fact that they're just not zeroing in on this is the body type, this is the style of play that we want. That's the kind of hey, look, we want a dynamic, talented quarterback. And those come in all different shapes and sizes. And that's what they're focused on. I think that's part of the smart strategy as well.
Well, I think that is confidence in your coaching staff, right, Brian? Like, that's confidence not only in the play calling, but also in the quarterback development. Like, I just don't want to cycle in on one type, because I think that limits your evaluation of a bunch of different other quarterbacks that could be successful. It's just going to look different, right? As long as you get to the end result, that's all that ultimately matters, right? So some guys might get there differently, but it's your job as a quarterback to put guys in the best position possible. So I don't care if it's a 6'5" pure pocket kid, or it's a 6'2" dynamic athlete that is going to utilize his legs a little bit more. As long as you are comfortable with your coaches as far as development and implementation of using those skills, that's all that matters at the end of the day, man. And I think that the best coaches, historically have built off of that, right? Like, what does a Steve Sarkisian quarterback look like, Brian? I think that there's not a true answer to that, right? Like, there is qualities that you need in that system, but he can implement some guys that can run the football a little bit more, guys that you need to move the pocket a little bit more, guys that are more just pure pocket quarterbacks. The best coaches, I think, are guys that understand how to utilize different styles, in my opinion.
Yeah, and look at Alabama. Jalen Hurts is different than Tua Tagovailoa, and Tua Tagovailoa is different than Mac Jones, and Mac Jones is a little bit different than Bryce Young. They have very different style of quarterbacks, right? And Steve Sarkisian was part of that conversation, right? He had success with Tua, and he also had success with Mac Jones. You look at what he's done at Texas. They all need to be able to throw from the pocket. But
sure.
Arch Manning does a lot more running around and playmaking than Quinn Ewers did. You know what I mean? When you look at how he was as a player. And obviously Malik Murphy and Arch are very similar from style of play standpoints. So, and you're also, look, if you can have a quarterback that can move around, even if he's a passer, I think that's important. And I think that's something that we're seeing, not just for Notre Dame focusing on, but we're just seeing more and more of that overall as the game changes. You're seeing a lot more of those guys available. So that's certainly positive.
And it's consistent on the 2025 board. We're going to talk about some guys that are like 6'5", 200 plus pounds. And we're going to talk about some guys that are 6 foot, but they all have that component to their game of some are more of runners than others, but all of them have the ability to win outside of structure and to extend the pocket.
And they can all run the current offense. Some you'll have to, focus on different things than others, but there's nobody that's just like, that guy's nothing like those other guys. I don't know why you would recruit that guy. I still, to this day, have no clue why they recruited Avery Davis as a quarterback. Now, look, I had no problem recruiting Avery Davis, and I would have taken Avery Davis in that class. I thought he was a very good athlete, and, you see the projection, you saw what he ended up. I don't think anybody was surprised that he could move somewhere else, but they genuinely thought he was a quarterback. They genuinely played him a quarterback his freshman year. To me, a year of wasted development. especially when you look at the offense that they ran. You don't want to make those mistakes, and I don't see anybody like that in this year's class. So let's dive in, Ryan, and talk about the quarterbacks on the board. And I think where we're going to start is with Deuce Knight. Deuce Knight, obviously, he's a name a lot of Notre Dame fans are going to be familiar with. 6'5", 185-pound quarterback from Lucedale, Mississippi, plays at George County High School. Ryan, you've had a chance to talk with Deuce lately. Let's get a little bit into that, and then we'll talk more about Deuce as a prospect.
Yeah, I mean, so basically the update on Deuce is that Notre Dame has positioned themselves in a very good spot, in my opinion. This is, if you ask me today, which quarterback is Notre Dame in the best spot with currently, I would say Deuce Knight out of Mississippi. He is a 6'4" plus, 185 pounds is what he was listed at, obviously, end of the season, but he's told me that he's up near now about 198 pounds. And I mean, it's stayed consistent since he took that visit to the unofficial visit a few weeks ago to Notre Dame. It really has been a separating factor for him, his relationship with Gino Guidugli. He mentioned him a ton, and he mentions him a ton every single time I talk to the young man, is that just how authentic, energetic, just how good of a person that Gino Guidugli is. So I think that relationship is really bolstered and really been able to gain more momentum even after the visit. And right now, I mean, he mentioned to me Notre Dame, he mentioned Tennessee, he mentioned Ole Miss, he mentioned University of Washington. I think that right now, Notre Dame and Tennessee are probably the two leaders near the top, but Ole Miss is obviously a sneaky team, especially for an in-state player. So I think that that's probably the top right now. Deuce has been consistent with me that he would like to make a decision sometime in the early summer. So he's kind of leaves it a little bit open-ended as far as when he wants to make it, as far as setting an official date. But I do think that that is one where he's probably the next quarterback to make a decision for sure, as of right now, at least more of a firm timeline. And I think that Notre Dame is going to be in it until the very end. I really do. Again, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, it's in no particular order right now either. And if they were able to get a guy like a Deuce Knight, I texted Brian this yesterday, but Notre Dame, the last, they got a cornerback out of in the 2019 class out of Mississippi. Caleb Offord. Before that, they had not signed a kid out of Mississippi since 1996. So that is not a
who was that? Do you remember?
That
wasn't Jarius Jackson, was it?
No, Jarius Jackson was 1995 class. So 1 year before that, they had a 96 kid whose name I'd never heard before. So I don't know if he panned out at Notre Dame or not. So yeah, but I mean, regardless, Mississippi is not a place that Notre Dame has had any. I mean, and not that they haven't had any success in, they just haven't frequented that state much, right? Like they just haven't.
I'm going to find out that answer, Ryan.
Yes, I mean,
now it's going to bother me.
Yes.
I will say this about Deuce. Obviously we like where Notre Dame is right now, but I do think that there's still work to be done. I think Tennessee is a team that for me concerns me a little bit, and this is one of those ones where normally I like when a kid makes a decision early. But I'll be completely honest with you, Ryan. I won't be necessarily heartbroken if Deuce decides he doesn't want to make a decision this summer, unless, of course, it's Notre Dame. But I do worry about, because there's going to be a lot of pressure on the young man from, I mean, it's just the way that it is. There's usually a lot of pressure to stay in the South. That's just the reality of it. And so that concerns me a little bit, but also because of the offense that Tennessee plays. If you're Deuce Knight right now with what Notre Dame is telling you, it's all theory. This is what we're going to do. It's not really what you see. Now, the good thing is he was able to be at a practice and saw firsthand, Notre Dame throwing the ball down the field, but he was a practice at one of those blitz practices. So they didn't really necessarily throw the ball down the field as much as, like, let's say the blue gold game. Right. And so that's a little bit concerning for me, just because right now, I mean, Tennessee can say, well, just look what we did. Not look what we're going to do, but just look what we did. And Notre Dame can't necessarily do that. So that's my only concern when I look at just really diving into what his decision might be. But I do think that Notre Dame has done a great job in this recruitment. I just get a little bit, I've done this for a long time, and I always get just a little hesitant when we talk about kids from states like that where they just haven't had a long history of success. But I hope that this staff is different. That's the thing. And this is what they're going to get an opportunity to do. Let's talk a little bit about Deuce as a player, Ryan. And I think that's something that obviously is important in this conversation is, we're talking about a young man. This is actually going to be a couple highlights from his spring game. But I'll tell you the first thing that I noticed, and this is an example right there. I'm still surprised at how, for such a skinny kid, how just strong his arm is. Still has a lot to work on, mechanically, but he's got a surprisingly really strong deep ball arm. Like he really does.
Well, and this is a kid we have to remember again that just finished up his sophomore year of school, right? Like
Mhm.
this is a kid that is still developing physically, has put on a massive, not massive, but he's put on 13 to 15 pounds this offseason so far. So he's certainly filling out. Younger brother of Ty Freifogel that played at the University of Indiana, played wide receiver out there, obviously. So I really think for me, Brian, like that athleticism really pops on film, especially like you see him as a thrower. And the thing that the first thing I said about him on film, because I think it was his second throw from his sophomore tape, there's some easy velocity here, man. Like it does
Mhm.
not take much momentum for him to really create velocity in tight windows. So this is a thrower, guys. This is a thrower that is
Yeah.
also a dynamic athlete. Like he is that type of dude, in my opinion.
The concern I have, why I think I'm nervous about his recruitment, Ryan, because the
Yep.
player that he most reminds me of is Deuce Knight, or I mean, excuse me, he's Deuce Knight, is Hendon Hooker. He's like a
Yes.
left-handed version of Hendon Hooker,
Yes.
because of his natural feel for the game, his ability to throw the ball downfield. Hendon had a really awkward, I won't say awkward throwing motion. I don't think Hendon Hooker had an awkward throwing motion. I think Hendon Hooker doesn't have a traditional throwing motion. It looks a little bit more, I don't know, mechanical than necessarily like a Bryce Young or a CJ
Sure.
Stroud. But man, he was able to put that sucker anywhere he wanted to put it. And he had very easy power as a
Easy
passer too. Like
velocity. Yeah.
you watch Hendon Hooker play and you're like, well, he doesn't really have a strong arm just because the way he throws, it doesn't look like, like it's coming out. Then you're like, dang, he threw that 25-yard in cut on a line.
Yes.
That ball he just threw to Jalen Hyatt went like 65 yards in the air. You're like, holy moly. And that's how I see Deuce Knight. So it's just kind of like, oh man, like the perfect compliment to this kid. The perfect comp for this kid is a kid that was at Tennessee, and Tennessee's is another one of his top schools. So I think that might be a little bit why I was nervous about it. Hey, right. By the way, I do know the guy that the last guy from Mississippi. I didn't know this. It was Jay Johnson, a receiver from Mississippi. Jay Johnson actually still lives in this area. He was named head
Oh,
coach at Washington High School in South Bend recently. So he's been a high
nice.
school football coach in this area for a very long time. So yeah, he's decided to stay up in Indiana.
Good for
So
him.
yeah, I just looked at the roster from '96 and saw that it was Jay Johnson. They signed him and Jarius Jackson in back-to-back years.
Yes, he
So that
did.
would be good. And I think there's another part to this conversation too, and it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same when we get to the KJ Lacy conversation. Is Mississippi and Alabama are very talented states. Alabama especially is really growing as a state when it comes to producing top players, and Alabama can't sign them all and doesn't sign them all because they can't afford to bring in everybody because contrary to popular opinion, teams can't just sign everyone and figure it out, right? They actually have to make decisions on stopping their recruiting classes at some point in time from a number standpoint. And so I would love to see them get more into those states. And there's no better way to do that than to sign a big time quarterback from those states. I
Yes.
mean, I'm
Yes.
serious. Like that is such a great opportunity to open up that, like you talk about building a bridge. There's no better way to build a bridge than with a big time quarterback from a state that you're not normally real successful in. And Deuce is an example of that as well. And the next guy we're going to discuss too is an example of that, Ryan, and that's KJ Lacy, who is from Saraland High School in Alabama. It is wild to see how much the state of Alabama, it's always been a good state when it comes to producing countdown to players, but it has really taken off. And I think part of it is not so much that they're producing more players, that's part of it, but it's also about how they're just being recognized finally as good players, where you'd see these 3-star kids from Alabama go to Auburn, go to Alabama, go somewhere like that. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, this guy's really good. Where'd he come from? Well, he was always that good. You didn't pay attention to the state of Alabama.
Sure.
Now that Alabama's been so dominant, they get so many players, you're getting more and more love from there. And they also are producing more on average, per capita, whatever the case may be. But KJ Lacy's a very intriguing player because he doesn't seem to be a top target for Alabama right now. Auburn obviously is a school you have to be concerned about with Hugh Freeze and the offense that he brings to the table. But the fact that Alabama is not on KJ Lacy right now really hard does give Notre Dame a little bit of a window, Ryan, when it comes to getting involved with him. And they offered him early. He's had some great things to say about Notre Dame, and the staff is obviously, I think they were down to see him twice during the most
Yeah,
recent open period, Ryan. So
they
he's
were.
clearly a priority for the staff.
And he should be. He really should be.
Yeah.
I mean, quite simply, this is a kid that some people are going to look at the heights, right? They're going to be like, "Oh, typical Notre Dame quarterback recruit or whatever," because that's just a tired old, just myth at this point. But people are going to stick to it, because the Ian Books of the world, right? They're going to say, "Oh, 5'11", 6-foot quarterback. Can't Notre Dame do better?" And I'm just, guys, I'm telling you right now, and I know we'll pop on some film here in a couple minutes, but this kid is one of the more advanced quarterbacks in the 2025 class. He understands where to go with the football. I think that for a comp that gets thrown out there way too much in Bryce Young, I think that this is the Bryce Young comp. I really do. I love KJ and his ability to just understand where things are happening in front of him on the field. He has kind of that innate sense to him. So Notre Dame, it's smart to be on him early because, to your point, Brian, there are still some SEC powers that are haven't quite thrown their hat into the ring. We'll see if they do. I mean, it's interesting, obviously, that Alabama isn't really pushing at this point, but we shall see what obviously happens with that. But I mean, at the end of the day, man, this kid can play the quarterback position as well as anybody in the 2025 class. Is his upside as much as maybe a Deuce Knight or an Antoine Hill or someone like that just has supreme physical gifts? Probably not. But his baseline, his floor for him, despite him being a smaller quarterback, is so impressive in a guy like a KJ Lacy. So yes, getting a kid out of Alabama is not going to be an easy task. And you have to get him obviously on campus is the big point that you want because he has never been on campus at Notre Dame. But if they are, then anything's possible. We talk about that. Anytime you get a kid on campus, possibilities start opening a little bit. So unrealistic, obviously, at this point with where he's from and getting him out of the South. But KJ Lacy is a really talented kid, man. And I'm glad Notre Dame's recruiting him because there is just some things on film you watch of him, you're like, I can't really teach a kid that. Like either they have that or they don't. And he has some innate ability to play football, man. He really sees the field at an advanced level for his age.
The thing about him, Ryan, is I think you mentioned this, but I hate lazy comps, right? And sometimes I feel like there are certain players that just make it every time there's a 6-foot quarterback, you're going to compare him to Bryce Young, and it's lazy. But you and I were talking about this last week, and it's like, but it's just fits so well with KJ Lacy because the thing about him is he runs around and he'll scramble and make plays and all that stuff. But he is one of the most natural pocket passers in this class, in my opinion.
Yes. Yep.
And if it wasn't for the fact that he was 6 feet, I mean, he's listed at 6'1". I don't know if he's 6'1". I mean, he's short, just like Bryce Young was once listed at 6'1". And then he goes to the combine and you realize, wow, he shrunk an inch and a half since he was a senior in high school. No, he didn't. He was never 6'1". I don't know if he's that tall, but man, it just we're talking about sophomore film. The timing and anticipation in which he throws the ball, his feel for the game, the way he goes through his reads for a sophomore, the effortless nature in which he throws, his accuracy is as good as you're going to see in the sophomore. The only thing, quote unquote, not to like is his size. But again, he's actually pretty thick for a sophomore that's only 6 feet tall. He's got a good frame. He's already his frame to me is better than what Bryce Young's was at the same age or even as a senior. So that's a good sign. But man, this kid is an impressive player. Will Notre Dame be able to get him out of the state of Alabama or more so out of the South? We'll see. Long way to go on that, but he's definitely worth it, Ryan. And I'll tell you another guy that he reminds me a lot of, not quite the runner, but if you're someone who wants a Notre Dame comp, a guy that reminds me a lot of is Everett Golson coming out of high school. In that Everett just had a bazooka for an arm. Everett had one of the best arms I've ever seen. And could like that throw right there, Ryan. That is an absolute dart. And he's thrown it off of his. I said I wasn't going to rewind film. I knew I was going to lie as soon as I got to this kid's film. This is from the 27-yard line. He throws a 20-yard far hash out throw, fading away, and the ball is on an absolute line. This is one of the most impressive throws I've ever seen. And look at the ball placement. This is absurd, Ryan. Like this kid's special, Ryan. This kid is really special. This is a 5-star player in my opinion. I mean, this kid's unreal. I love this kid's film.
I remember we were watching film when the pot of gold stuff was about to drop, right, Brian? Like I think that we talked about this. I mean, I said at that point, I think this kid's the best quarterback in this crop right now. Again, there's upside and stuff that is going to be in this
Right.
conversation. But
You were
I
saying
really think
best player right now, not necessarily
yes.
best prospect, but best player, right?
Yes, I think he understands how to play the quarterback position as well as anybody on the board. He understands how to manipulate arm angles. He understands how to find open windows. He understands how to move in the pocket. He understands where everything is supposed to be on the field. I've never talked to him from a football perspective before, right? As far as like X's and O's, but I guarantee this kid's sharp on the board. Like I guarantee it just because he understands where to go with the football at all times,
Oh,
it
yeah.
seems.
I mean, there's certain things you can tell, Ryan. Like right there, his first read's taken away, and he just immediately goes into make a play mode. I mean, he's a really impressive kid. The only concern I have about him is he does have a little bit of a low delivery, especially being such a short kid, but it doesn't seem to affect him in high school. And again, throwing is about lanes and timing. I mean, when you
Yep.
look at that throw right there, there's no way you're getting your arm up. When he can get the ball out that quickly, there's no way a defensive lineman's going to be able to get his arm up and see that. I mean, it's like that kid right there. Even if he was taller, he just doesn't get his arm up in time to get to the ball. I mean, he throws with heat and he gets it out so quickly. He is a very that's tremendous, right? He just throws it out. Go make a play. I'm throwing it out to the open area. Go make a play. Watch when this ball comes out, folks. The receiver just has his back completely turned to the quarterback.
Yep.
Receiver's still running vertically, and he just throws it out and the guy goes out. I mean, that's just
Because he knows where he's going to be, man. He knows where he's going to be. I mean,
that's an
that's
unreal play. That is an
Yeah.
absolutely unreal play. So this kid is an incredibly talented quarterback. Ryan, I don't know how much of a chance Notre Dame has. I don't feel great about Notre Dame's odds. We got to wait to see him get on campus before I feel too good about it. But I love the fact that Notre Dame is making a push on this kid and not just assuming they're not going to get him.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, again, a kid from Alabama, the past, the data points would say that this is probably an unlikely grab for Notre Dame, but things change, man. And everyone talks about outliers and the data points, but every rule is meant to be broken, right? And Notre Dame, I think, is going to at least do their due diligence here and continue to recruit at a high level. And this staff, I've learned not to underestimate this staff, for some players.
And it's early, and he doesn't seem to be in a hurry to make a decision from what we can tell.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't seem, I haven't read anything, seen anything that makes me think he's like, gosh, I got to get a decision before my junior year. And that's going to give Notre Dame a chance, especially if the offense is going to look like what it's going to look like. Because look, I'm going to say this, Ryan, when you watch this kid throw, this is the kind of kid that's going to watch Sam Hartman at Notre Dame. And if Sam has the kind of year I think we're going to have, is going to be like, yep, I can see myself doing that. Smaller quarterback, great decision maker, accurate timing. I think he's going to see himself really fitting into the offense. I would not, if I'm a KJ Lacy type of player, I'm not looking at what Notre Dame has done so far and being like, oh gosh, yeah, I'm going to go throw for 1,000,000 yards in that offense. It's just not. I mean, this is what we've said. I think I should say that the 2023 season is going to have a bigger impact on the 2025 class than the 2024 class. And in no position is that more true than quarterback.
Right.
And whether it's a Deuce Knight, KJ Lacy, George McIntyre, all these kids, the season is going to be important. And I think he's one of those kids that it is very important
Brian,
for them to see what they can do.
And one last thing I would say about KJ is that it might sound silly to some because, again, I know there's some shade that gets thrown at the Notre Dame quarterback thing of like being a smaller quarterback, being a 6-foot guy, all that type of stuff. But I actually think that helps recruit this kid a little bit. You can look at him and say, you know who the all-time leading wins at Notre Dame is? It's a 6-foot quarterback that's in the NFL. I understand, Brian, but like that's data points that matter. It is. I mean, you could say when we went to a national championship game against Alabama, you know who our quarterback was? A 6-foot quarterback that was similar to you.
That one I can dig. I'm digging you on that one. Yes, yeah. I'm digging you on that.
Sam Hartman is only a 6'1" even guy. You could say that is another data point where you look at and say we've won with quarterbacks that are similar size to what you bring to the table. We have won games with those.
Exactly. So, and that's why I think the Sam Hartman piece is really important for a kid like this. Like KJ Lacy is a sophomore in high school. That means the last time Ian Book was playing at Notre Dame, he was in middle school. Sure. Which makes it's just so weird to say that, weird. But seriously, the last time Ian Book was playing quarterback at Notre Dame, this kid was in what, 7th, 8th grade? 8th grade, maybe?
Yep.
So it does say a lot when you think about how young these guys are, but they can throw the football. Let's move on to another quarterback, Ryan. That's George McIntyre from Brentwood Academy in Tennessee. Talk about tall and skinny. Nobody is more tall and skinny than George McIntyre. Notre Dame has obviously been out to see him a couple times. He was a kid that's been offered twice by Notre Dame, once by Tommy Rees, and then once again by the new staff. Very different player than some of the other guys on the list, Ryan, mainly because of his body type, but a talented player nonetheless that has there's similarities with all these kids, but George McIntyre is an intriguing player. I would probably say right now, I would say that Deuce Knight and KJ Lacy probably are more likely options than George McIntyre at this point in time.
Agree.
But the staff is still pushing for him. There's no doubt about it. And he is a very tall, skinny, talented quarterback. Dad is Mike McIntyre, the former head coach at Colorado as well. So that adds into it also, Ryan. But I like the staff is not backing down from kids they're not in a great position with right now. I love that about this staff, especially a quarterback right now. But there's a lot of ground to make up when it comes to where they stand currently with George McIntyre.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to phrase it is, I've had the ability to talk to George a couple times, and I think that there's a lot of intrigue in Notre Dame, Brian, right? And intrigue's a great thing, but I always talk about it when a guy gets to campus, intrigue usually turns into interest unless it's just not a fit for them. And I think that he's another kid like KJ Lacy. You need to try to get up to campus to be able to see it. I mean, we were, like the Deuce Knight situation, right? Where you're like, Deuce Knight is interested in Notre Dame or has intrigue in Notre Dame, but then he goes to the visit. You're like, oh, okay, there's interest there now. Like there's legitimate interest. I feel like it's the same type of thing because he's his dad's been all over. So, he's been kind of all over the place a little bit, but he's a Tennessee kid. His dad is now a coach in Florida, a college coach in Florida. So like there's Southern roots here.
Florida Atlantic or Florida International, one of those two, right?
I think it is Florida Atlantic, but do not quote me on that, but I think it's Florida Atlantic. Almost positive that it is. But yes.
Yeah, he's Florida International.
Okay. I'm wrong.
He's the head coach of Florida International. I couldn't remember. Those two kind of get the same to me, but he is now going into his second year at Florida International.
Yeah. So I mean, he's got his Southern roots, right? I mean, he's obviously his dad is coaching in Florida. He goes to high school in Tennessee. But at the end of the day, I feel like I had it.
Dad was the D coordinator at Memphis.
Yes.
Before he went, so that's would explain why it's like, okay, let's not uproot him, especially since, let's be real too, if Mike McIntyre has success at FAU, he's not going to be there very long.
No.
Let's be honest about that. So no need to uproot your kid if you're not, if you're definitely not like, hey, I'm a lifer at this place.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to interject that a little bit.
You're fine, man. You're not going to Florida International to retire, to your point. Like, that's not why you're doing it. So, I mean, I think that's a perfect way to put in. Again, you need to try to get him up to campus. He is a really interesting player on the field. I'm actually excited to look at his film, Brian, because I feel like there's assumptions that get made. You're like, this is 6'5", white quarterback. But then he does some stuff outside of structure, man, where you're like, oh, all right. It's got a little
There's two things, I'll be honest with you. There's two things that surprised me about George McIntyre. Look, I saw a picture of him, and I saw this really tall, skinny kid. I heard his dad was a coach, and I said he's going to be really smart and be a great decision maker and be accurate. And he is all those things.
Yes.
What I also thought, okay, so that stuff I was right on my assumptions. What I also thought was probably not overly athletic and probably doesn't have a very good arm because of he's just so dang skinny. This kid has an absolute rocket for an arm. Now, right now, his arm strength is more about the deep ball than it is so much on like a 25-yard out cut like KJ Lacy. Yep. That'll come as he fills out. But he has very easy downfield vertical throwing ability. And he's not a runner. He's a pocket passer, but he can move in the pocket. You know what I mean? Like he can buy time and move in the pocket and do those type of things. And I think he's going to get even more athletic as he fills out and gets stronger. But he is a very, very natural thrower of the football, Ryan, and surprisingly has a really strong arm. Like this throw right here. Watch this one. Like you're just like he just flicks it like 30 yards. Bam, no problem. Just flicks it. Then he had a deep ball earlier from about the same spot that went almost 50. That's another one. Very easy throw. Now, his arm is not as strong as KJ Lacy's at this point in time. I don't know if it's quite as strong as Deuce Knight's, but he can control it a little bit more than Deuce can right now. That's the thing I'll say. But his arm is going to get a lot stronger, especially on the 30-yard and in stuff, Ryan, as he fills
Yep.
out and gets in a weight room and stops being so skinny, which, that'll probably start happening over the next 2 years.
Yes. I mean, again, because he's a sophomore in high school, the maturation is going to happen naturally. Because Brian, I remember when I first saw his name, I was like, oh, Mike McIntyre's son. I was like, this kid's going to be Kyle Shermer, right? Like that was kind of the same thing. Remember him and they played for Vanderbilt. Like he was a really smart kid, accurate, but just didn't have great physical tools. This kid, McIntyre, has really good physical tools. He is a player that I think, as he fills out, he has about as high as upside as anybody in this class as just a pure thrower. I mean, he has that type of upside. I mean, you'd see him throw the ball 60 plus yards without much effort right now. I mean, he's like a javelin thrower as a quarterback right now.
Here's my only concern with George McIntyre. It's the only one that I have.
Yep.
I think that there gets a point in time, and some people are going to disagree with me on this, and I understand it. I think there gets a point in time where quarterback can be too tall. And right now, that's not a problem with George at all. He's fine. He's 6'5"-ish. But if you look at him, he's very long-legged, and I'm concerned that he might grow a few more inches. He almost kind of looks like a small forward that's like 6'4", 6'5" as a sophomore and ends up being 6'8", 6'9". That's my only concern. If he stays in the 6'6" or so range, I have no problem with that. But that's a minor concern, and that's probably more NFL related than it is college related, to be completely honest with you. So, but this kid, again, good feel, all that stuff that you'd expect from a coach's kid, but his skills there. I would probably put him, like if I'm ranking the quarterbacks, I'd probably put him number 4 on the list of guys that I like as far as current talent plus projection, but he's still a 5-star. Which, again, speaks to just how loaded this quarterback class is, Ryan. I view him as a 5-star quarterback for a sophomore. Now, he's got to continue developing and all that stuff, but he's a 5-star sophomore, as is Deuce, as is Lacy, as is Bryce Underwood, who we'll briefly talk about here in a second.
Yeah. I mean, he's exceptionally talented. I mean, just to talk about the depth of this class, Brian, like there are several kids that Notre Dame has either been out to see or have visited Notre Dame in the past where I'm like, it kid probably gets an offer in recent years, but it's just the fact of the depth of this class is just really impressive.
Mm-hmm. The other thing too is he gets pressured a lot more than the other quarterbacks in the class. Like he's constantly throwing off his back foot, having to scramble around. So you do get to see that a lot. Cause if he was like playing, like you see an example right there, if he was playing at a school where he was just free all the time and not getting pressured, I would wonder about his pocket presence and mobility and all that kind of stuff. But he is constantly under duress in high school. Yep. And you see a guy that does as good of a job as you're going to see from a sophomore of moving around and keeping his eyes downfield as he moves around. He does a really nice job with that. Like he sees this guy coming free early. And as soon as he clears the pocket, he throws the ball down the field. So
throws really well in the run too.
He does
for a guy that's
he has to.
Kid.
Yep. He has to, man. So again, this is not something he's going to be making a living on doing stuff like that in college, but he can do it if you need him to do it. He's more of a to me a true pocket passer, Ryan. Now, a true pocket passer is not, when I say that, it's not a stiff. A true pocket passer is not a guy that can't move. That's an immobile quarterback, not a pocket passer. I think sometimes we see a guy that can't move, and you're like, oh, he's a pocket passer. No, he's immobile. That's what he is.
Do you remember young Ben Roethlisberger when he was on the Steelers before he got too heavy? Like that's what I kind of feel, man. Like Ben could move. It was just that it's not his game, like until it has to be his game, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And Ben was very skinny very early in his career at Miami of Ohio as well. So, but yeah, I like George. He's a good player. Notre Dame has a lot of work they need to do if they're going to be real players for him, but they're on him. He talks to them. They've been down to see him. So they're in the conversation, in my opinion, with him. Yep. There's no doubt. Let's talk about a couple guys here really quick, Ryan, before we move on to a couple sort of newish names on the board. Bryce Underwood from Belleville High School, #1 quarterback in the country as of right now. Antoine Hill is another very talented top 100 caliber quarterback from Warner Robins, Georgia. Notre Dame is still recruiting both of them. They've been out to see both of them this open period, but right now we do not view them as targets right now that Notre Dame has a much of a shot at the current moment. Now that could change, and this staff is going to continue to keep recruiting those guys, which we love. But right now, Bryce Underwood is Notre Dame's not very high on his list. And I would say the same thing about Antoine Hill, although I'm less confident of that just because we don't know. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement there about him coming up anytime soon and those type of things. So those are guys on the list. Those are guys the staff is still recruiting, but not guys that we're going to spend a lot of time on because we just don't view them as realistic targets at the current time.
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation about Bryce Underwood is everyone and their mother is recruiting Bryce Underwood. I mean, this kid is, in my opinion, he is the best combination of ceiling and floor in this class. When you take both into conversation, I think that he is the best quarterback in this class, especially when you take both those in the conversation. Just everybody's going to be after him. I mean, everybody is after him. That's kind of where you are with it. Antoine Hill is incredibly toolsy. Yes.
On Bryce too. I don't think the fact that that CJ Carr is at Notre Dame, it's going to impact Bryce Underwood more than it's going to impact most other quarterbacks because he, of all people, knows how good CJ Carr is.
Sure.
And not that he's afraid of competition. It has nothing to do with that. It's just about you also want to be realistic. Like, hey, I'm not afraid of competition, but I also know that this guy's really good and he's going to have a year head start on me. So why would I go there and compete with him when I can go to Ohio State and compete with Aaron Noland, with all due respect, you know what I mean? Or go to Penn State and compete with whoever, the kid that they just got in the 24 class, who's not in the same league as like a CJ Carr. I just think that would make a lot more sense. And so that's another reason why I don't think Notre Dame's in a great place here. But back to, I just want to get that point in there before we moved away from him and get to Antoine Hill.
No, you're good. Yeah. I mean, it's a good point to add. I mean, but for Antoine Hill, I mean, this is a kid that is listed at 6'5", 215 pounds. He is that Cam Newton-esque style of player where this kid's going to be 6'5", 240 pounds before you know it. Like he's going to be one of those Anthony Richardson, Cam Newton type of clones as far as the body type perspective, because he's still skinny and he's already 215 pounds. Like he's going to be a massive, massive kid, strong arm, really good athlete. A lot of development that needs to happen with an Antoine Hill. And I mean, every time I talk to Antoine, he says the right things, but it's one of those other situations where it's like, get to campus and then we'll see stuff actually happens after that.
And if you're someone who likes comps, I mean, it is so easy to make this one, but it's hard not to see a kid that think Anthony Richardson. Now he's not quite the dynamic athlete that Anthony is, and he's not nearly as thick as Anthony was, but their raw ability to me is very similar. Yes. When I look at these two kids, very raw. This kid, like you said, Ryan, has an absolute bazooka for an arm. And I'm watching his highlights here for a second. He throws a pass from the 15-yard line, his own 15, and the other guy catches it at about the other 32. From the far hash to the other numbers. That is a cannon.
Decent arm, man. Decent arm.
Very raw as a player. Again, sophomore, right?
Yeah.
He's the one to me that I could say I could see him making the biggest jump over the next 2 years of all these quarterbacks. Him and Deuce, to me, probably are the two that could make the biggest jumps. Like George McIntyre is going to make a jump physically the next 2 years.
Yep.
Deuce and Antoine are not only going to make jumps physically, but they're also going to make jumps mechanically as well. And that's what's I think could cause them to really take off. Like KJ Lacy, other than him just physically maturing, I don't know how much better he's going to get. Now, that's fine because right now he's still really flipping good. He's one of those guys, Ryan, that is if KJ Lacy does nothing but normal physical maturity the next 2 years, and that's the only improvement he makes, he's still a top 50 quarterback to me. He's that good.
Agree. Yeah.
Because and that's not a saying what he doesn't. There's just not a lot of room for him to improve other than just normal physical and experience and things like that.
Growing 2 inches and getting some weight on him.
He's already really a fundamentally sound quarterback which is weird to say for a guy that plays off structure as much. But when you watch him in the pocket, his footwork is really good. His throwing motion is impeccable. His timing is great. There's just not a lot of – now, some quarterback's coach is going to probably convince him that he needs to do this, or this, and we see it all the time. Yep. I'm trying to think of the most recent guy. A buddy of mine sent me film of a quarterback, and I can't remember who it was. It wasn't a Notre Dame guy. But how he's working with some quarterback, and his quarterback is working with his throwing motion. And I'm thinking, this is what's wrong with the quarterback coaching industry, and it's turned into an industry, is in order for me to convince you to spend money to come play for me, I've got to convince you that your son has some flaw that I need to fix.
Right, exactly.
And that's how we see guys like Tyler Buckner change their throwing motion in a way that he should have never changed his throwing motion, because somebody had to convince him, well, this is why you need to pay me a crap load of money, because I got to fix some perceived problem that doesn't really need to be fixed. Yes. And so unless that happens to KJ Lacy, I don't see, he doesn't really need a lot of that kind of refinement. Just the normal, natural maturity that you're going to see from a kid going from sophomore to junior. That's really where it's at.
I agree. I mean, I think that we are in an era where everyone is a specialist, and sometimes those specialists mess a lot of people up. I agree. We've literally seen it at Notre Dame, a couple situations.
Yes. Yeah, because it's just like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be shutting your pie hole and not working with it. Like, I think that I'm all for there being a lot of good quarterback coaches, but it's kind of like teach the basics, right? Footwork, release, aiming point, working with certain things. Have people there to drill these kids, not necessarily convince them, well, I need to change something about you. No. Right. If someone's trying to get look, little message to quarterback coaches, to parents of quarterbacks out there and quarterbacks out there. If somebody's trying to convince you to come spend money to come work with them, and they are talking to you a lot about changing your throwing motion, I have 3 words for you. I'm going to go back to my time as a child of the 80s. Just say no. If they're talking to you about footwork and the mental part of the game, and maybe working on, changing your grip of the football a little bit, that's all A-okay. That's someone that knows what they're doing, because everybody needs footwork help as a quarterback. Everybody needs to be, hey, let's make sure you've got the proper grip on the ball, because I'm seeing the ball come out and do some of these funky things. Working on that, totally fine. But if somebody's talking about we're going to change your throwing motion, just say no. Okay?
It was last year in the draft, Brian. There was a quarterback coach, a renowned quarterback coach, that was working with Malik Willis, right? Yeah. And the only videos I saw of him was doing out of structure throws. And I'm like, that's not what Malik Willis needs. He needs help in structure, sir.
Well, it's like I'm watching I'm watching the stuff that the Simses were doing with Jack Cohn. And they're trying to get him to work on throwing off platform and changing arm angles. I'm like, that's not Jack Cohn's game. That's a waste of time for me, because that's, especially at his age, that's something you work on at a very young age. You get your 6th grader to be working on that. You know what I mean? Because then it becomes the reason Dante Moore can throw like that, the reason KJ Lacy can throw like that, is because they've probably been doing this since they were little kids.
Yeah.
And they're just used to it. And so that's kind of my little hint. But as long as somebody doesn't screw him up like that, he should be good. KJ will be good. Notre Dame, Ryan, recently went out to Massachusetts and visited Lawrence Central Catholic, which is the home of Preston Zinter, 2023 linebacker signee Preston Zinter. And they have a quarterback there, Ryan, named Blake Hebert. It could be Hebert. We don't know. We'll as soon as we get the real pronunciation for that, we will say it. But Blake is a guy, Ryan, that I heard about him. And again, everybody makes first assumptions, right? We all have a first impression. I'm thinking Massachusetts private school, not a guy that I've heard of before. Okay, let's see. Let's pop in the film. And then it took me about 3 or 4 throws, and I was like, yep. I can dig it. This kid can play. Ryan, you had a chance to speak with Blake recently.
Yep.
How'd that go? What did you learn about him and his interest in Notre Dame and those type of things?
I mean, I think he has high interest in Notre Dame. He kind of talked a little bit about, what he knows of the program is great football, great academics, kind of the best of both worlds. You mentioned that. Obviously, he had been at least introduced a little bit when Preston Zinter was being recruited, as far as what Notre Dame stands for. And he is a young man that I know Notre Dame wants to come up to South Bend to be able to take the tour and do all that type of stuff. And it's something that he's very open to and something that he wants to do. So he has not been extended an offer by Notre Dame. This is merely another player to keep a close eye on, and who knows what could happen. But this is not a scrub by any. I mean,
he's a good. Well, I know one service already has him as a top 100 player,
like 60 something overall. Yeah. And he's got legit offer lists too. Like it's a good offer list that's expanding. Like he's got some guy, like he's legit Power 5 programs have been offering him already. He's got double digit offers. So this is a talented kid, and he has
Penn State just offered him too. So I'm going to say it right now. If Notre Dame wants to be involved with this kid moving forward, they're going to need to offer somewhat soon. I think the concern that I would have, Ryan, is you got to be careful offering a kid that you think you may be able to get right now if you're still not sure who you want.
Exactly, yeah.
And like they knew that when they offered Deuce Knight and George McIntyre, KJ Lacy, they weren't going to commit on the spot.
There's going to be a process.
Right. But you needed to do that. I think you don't know enough about this kid to know that he won't want to commit right away. And that's terrible when you offer a kid and then he wants to commit and you got to say no.
Yes.
But unless you think he's going to commit right away, I would get involved with him. I would get him offered soon. I would try to get him on campus in June and probably get an offer out to him at that, unless you think he's going to commit soon. But honestly, if they decided that they wanted to take this kid, I don't know that I would have a lot to say about it, Ryan. I mean, we'll pop in the film. Let's just pop in the film and take a peek at this kid. But he is a pocket passer. All right.
Yes.
He's a guy that's going to be a pocket passer. But I see a kid with a really, really live arm, Ryan. Just a really natural throw of the football, really quick. He's got a little bit of a dip in his release, but it's really quick.
Yes.
And I don't love that dip. I would never teach it, but I wouldn't change it as long as it's accurate. But look how just easily the ball jumps out of his hand right there. I mean, that's a 50-yard throw that he makes with not a lot of effort, and it gets up and gets – you've heard me say this before, Ryan. I say I like a deep ball that gets up and gets down quickly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. There's no floating here. This ball gets up and down in a hurry. And why is that important? The longer the ball stays in the air, I don't care how far it's going, the more time there is for defenders to get to the football. When you can get that sucker up and down in a hurry, it makes it a lot harder for guys to get to the football. This is a throw he makes to Preston Zinter, showing off Preston's athleticism. Heck yeah, it is, man. This is Notre Dame signee Preston Zinter, but that is an easy throw, Ryan. He's thrown that from the 13-yard line, and it is a far hash throw, and he flicks it like it's nothing, and the guy catches it near midfield on the opposite numbers. That is a very long throw. High school hashes we're talking about here too, folks, which are wider than college hashes.
Well, I'm kind of upset about Preston because Preston never told me about this kid, so I just had to kind of find out about him recently, right? But I mean, I mean, easy velocity. Like this is another kid where the ball just jumps out of his hand. His arm is live. There's a foundation that's been built as far as his ability to generate velocity, and it should be no surprise that he's also a baseball player. So I think he's just got kind of that torque in his lower half, but he is a very talented kid. Again, Gino Guidugli has had conversations with him, obviously not on the visit because they're not allowed to talk to them directly there, but has talked to him already in the past. He was out to see him, and Blake told me that he was slinging the thing around a little bit with some of his teammates. This
is almost a 40-yard throw, Ryan, and he does it like it's nothing. I mean, he throws this like it's a fade from the 10. You know what I mean? Just that's the thing I love about this class, Ryan. There are absolute rocket-armed kids in this 25 class.
Easy throwers, man. Really easy
like
throwers.
Just rock. I mean, and here's the thing, like they are a lot like Dante. There's a lot more like guys that are like Dante in this class than there are the Nikos. You know what I mean? Like Nico's a kid and Jaden Rashad are two kids with absolute bazookas for arms, but they're just not harnessed at all.
Right.
And Nico's a lot further along than the other kid is, but than Jaden Rashad is. But there's a lot of kids that are big arm that were kind of raw. You know, there was some undersized, Chris Vizina's like that, a little raw, big arm, but raw. These are kids with big arms, but they're not the raw, I'm not sure if this kid's ever going to figure it out thing. These kids are much more advanced mechanically and mentally, than what we saw from the kids, even in the 23 class, which was just a tremendous, tremendous recruiting class. And you see it here. This is fine for high school, and he'll be able to kind of be like a Brady Quinn type of runner. I can convert a 3rd and 5. if you give me a crease, I mean, look, Jack Cohn ran for 20-something yard touchdown at Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like, if there's nobody there, but he's not a guy that's going to go out there and you're running a bunch of read zone with. And, he is a kid that's a quality athlete, but he is a pocket quarterback. And he shows really nice deep ball touch. Really nice deep ball touch.
And he's very consistent with the football as well too, Brian, because he threw one interception this year, so he's a kid that hasn't turned the ball over.
He was 20. I mean, he didn't throw a ton of passes, but he threw like 20 some touchdowns, if I believe.
Yes, 24 touchdowns and only one interception. So yeah,
and threw almost 1,000 yards. So yeah, I mean, only one interception is pretty good. You can see here, like, again, he's a quality athlete. That stuff doesn't project as well, right, as far as being able to do that kind of thing at the next level. But he can move around. I'll say this, one thing that I want to see him do if I was his quarterback's coach, one thing that I would want to see him do is I'd like to see him be a little bit more he gets a little heavy with his feet in the pocket.
Yeah.
And I would want to see him just be a little bit more balanced, a little bit more active, a little bit with his feet when he's sitting there going through progressions. Because when he has to then move, there's a clear resetting of his weight that has to happen that allows him to avoid high school players, but would make him a little bit more sack prone against better players. That's something that I would want to work with him on. It's just, being a little bit quicker with your feet. He's got the quickness of his feet. It's more of a technical thing. Don't be so set in your feet when you're on the ground. Like that right there was good. I liked that right there. That was a good example of what I'm talking about, Ryan. You see how he doesn't really set his feet. He goes through his progressions. He's not like really buried in that back foot. He's moving, he's active, and then he sees he's got to step out, and he's good. Like that right there. So he can do it. There's just a lot of throws too where I just feel like he gets really heavy-footed in the pocket and when he's sitting at the top. But it's a nice little play there by old Preston Zinner, Notre Dame player right?
Every time I see Preston Zinner on offense, Brian, I'm quickly reminded that this kid could have played Power 5 tight end for a team if he wanted to as well.
Yes, he absolutely could. He absolutely could. No, it's like an H-back type of guy, like a Jack Larson type. Yeah, absolutely could. Absolutely could. Yeah, he's a good football player. So this is a guy, Ryan, that Notre Dame fans are going to want to learn a little bit more about and keep an eye on. I hope that they're able to get him on campus at some point in time this summer.
Yep,
I am, and just continue to get that process rolling with him.
Boards at IrishBreakdown.com, and you'll know before anybody. So
that's right. There's another young man, Ryan, that Notre Dame is, I believe they've been out to see this during this recent open period, and a guy that Notre Dame is also involved in. There's a couple we're going to talk about here as we wrap this up. One is Carter Smith from Florida. He's from Fort Myers, Florida, goes to Bishop Verrett High School. I do know that Notre Dame was down there this spring, and I know that Coach Gaduli was down there looking at 2025 quarterbacks. I didn't know who they were at the time. We have a better idea of now who they were, and one of them was Carter Smith, who is a kind of a new name to the board, Ryan, not a guy with an offer. Obviously, they can't talk to these kids face-to-face when they're down there, but they did all their homework, talked to people about him, and obviously let the folks know there to make sure that Carter knew that there was some interest. So not a very highly ranked guy, Ryan. If you look at the rankings for Carter Smith, he's not a guy that right now is, I think the only one that I looked at was like Rivals, and they have not even given him a ranking. I'm going to the On3 thing now to see what they have him. So it looks like actually On3 is a trip. They have some weird rankings. They have him as the number 19 player in the country. 247 and Rivals has him as like an unranked 3-star, which is kind of interesting. So we'll see. They have such weird freaking rankings, dude. But let's pull up some Carter Smith film and take a peek at him, Ryan, as we talk about this. But again, just a new name on the board, a guy that Notre Dame is talking to. I don't know. I'm not gonna say anything because then it's gonna seem like I'm ripping the kid when I'm not. I just think On3 has really terrible rankings, but nice arm, Ryan. Decent athlete, nice frame. Watched some of his highlights earlier. He's got some skills. He doesn't quite have the arm talent that some of the other quarterbacks that we've looked at have, but he's got some skill. There's no doubt.
And I think it's very important. Again, this is someone that Gino Guidugli has seen in person now at this point. Yeah. So that natural maturation from sophomore to junior, sure, he's gotten a little bigger. Maybe his arm has improved a little bit as far as the pure arm strength is concerned. So another kid to keep an eye on in Florida, right, Brian? So that's it's a spot that Notre Dame's had very mixed results in, to say the least. So
yeah, that's being kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a nice arm, Ryan. I mean, I like this kid's arm, and he's going to keep filling out.
Yep.
It's not the hose. He's a pocket guy that can move around. It's not
Yep.
quite the hose that other kids in the class are, but it says a lot about this class where you're going to have such a big variance of opinion on quarterbacks. Like this right here. This is an example. This is a nice toss, but there's a lot of effort that's going on in this throw, and it's about a 40 to 45-yard throw. So but it'll, again, sophomore, Ryan.
Yes,
Sophomore.
exactly.
Like that right there. That's about a 45-yard throw. And this guy puts everything he has into it. I mean, look at him falling down. So the arm isn't quite as powerful, but you know what? It got there, and it got there with some zip, and it got there where it needed to be.
You ever seen the javelin throwers they're
Yeah.
the type that would all their momentum would take them off their feet and they would land on their chest? That's what this kid is to me. It puts all the momentum into his ball.
Yeah. He throws very well on the run, Ryan, too. He's another one that has really nice throw on the run skills, and he throws a really nice touch on like corners and outs and things like that. So
he's gonna score on that.
Yeah,
wow.
quality athlete. But more of a pocket guy that can scramble a little bit than he is necessarily a runner. But this is a guy to keep an eye on for Notre Dame. And
quick release, though. I like the
very quick and compact.
Yep.
Now that's the kind of throwing motion I would teach more if I was starting from scratch. That quick, right here. I would never teach this that you see a lot of kids do. Some kids, though, they have no like Trevor Lawrence could not throw the way that Steve Spurrier teaches quarterbacks to throw.
Because he's got such long levers.
Too long limbed, exactly. Yeah. Too long limbed. But Danny Warfel can do that like a champ because he's a shorter arm guy. Nico is never going to throw that way. Dante could, because Nico's like a small, Division I small forward, basically, lengthwise. Yeah. Right. Some guys they just got to throw. Like, this kid's not like that. So I like the fact he's got a really quick upper pull throwing motion. It's upper pull, lower pull. It's just kind of how I said it. I don't know if that's just kind of my thing. I don't know if anybody else actually uses those words, but you'll see what I'm talking about. So yeah, he's got some skills, Ryan. There's another young man. Go ahead. Did you want to say anything else, Ryan, about this one?
I was just agreeing with you is all.
Okay. Yep. There's another quarterback that we're going to talk about here to wrap things up. That is completely different type of player than what the other guys we've seen. This is a true dual threat quarterback, and this is a young man by the name of David McComb from Oklahoma. Notre Dame's offered obviously some kids from Oklahoma recently. They have a running back that they've offered in the 2024 class, Xavier Robinson. David McComb, I do not believe, has a Notre Dame offer as of right now, but he's definitely a guy that Notre Dame is doing their homework on and has expressed some interest in. So he's another guy to keep an eye on here, and we're going to watch a little bit of film of David McComb, Ryan. And the thing that you'll see is this is the kid that I was saying earlier, to me, is more Avery Johnson than he is Kenny Minchie as a player. Right. You know what I mean? He's a bit of a gunslinger, and he's a pretty good athlete, and he's a pretty good runner. He's not the athlete that Avery Johnson was. But style of play-wise, he's much more similar to that than he is some of the drop-back guys we've seen in this class. But really live arm for a smaller guy. He's listed as 6'3", 215. I'd have to see a picture. He doesn't look like that on film to me.
He does not.
But he's got a really live arm, and he's a pretty good athlete too, in my opinion.
It's a little looser mechanically than a couple of the guys that we've talked about. I think it's a little bit more.
That throw right there is a perfect example. Watch how fluid this throwing motion is. This is really easy. Bam.
Yep.
Real quick. Really quick. The ball gets out there now. That's not an easy throw from the far numbers to the back hash. Yeah, that's a far throw. But this kid's a legit runner, Ryan.
Yes, he is.
He's a legit runner.
And decently developed frame for a kid his age too, right? Like maybe it's not 6'3", but he's got a decently filled out frame for a kid his age, which is very interesting. And another kid that has some easy velocity on the ball, right? Like he doesn't need to put a ton out there to just get it out.
Yeah,
which is great.
There's a lot of kids like this and like that in this class. Like this is just a really natural 15 to 18 yard out cut that he just throws with ease.
Yep.
Just bam. Just get his ball placement needs a little bit of work relative to some of the other quarterbacks. I was noticing that a little bit, Ryan, but it's not by much. It's not like he's way off. It's just not quite as precise as some of those other guys, but I really like his running ability that he brings to the table. It reminds me, he's not as dynamic of an athlete as Tyler Buckner was, but just running style, because Tyler's more athletic than he is fast.
Yeah.
And this kid is not as dynamic athletically as Tyler is, but he reminds me of some of the things that Tyler could. I love this throw right here.
Gets to his top speed quickly, more than like second, third gear type of kid. Yeah,
has some shiftiness to him for a thicker built kid, because Tyler's a pretty thickly built kid too.
He is.
But yeah, this kid's like, that's a really nice athletic move right there. So he's an interesting player, Ryan, and definitely another guy to keep an eye on.
So now we've talked about kids from Michigan, Tennessee, Florida, Oklahoma. I mean, again, if you want proof that Coach Gadouli's doing his due diligence, I think there's some proof in the pudding on this one.
I'm waiting to see them offer a kid from California, but right now it's the list that we've talked about today: Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Michigan, Georgia, Massachusetts, Florida, and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So we're waiting on Texas and California to get on the board, but there's a lot of guys. So this is David McComb.
No West Coast love.
No, not yet, man. Not yet. It would seem, and I know he spent some time out there, so I think we'll see something. We'll see that happen here soon enough. But we'll see. But that's David McComb from Memorial High School in Edmond, Oklahoma. So that, Ryan, is the quarterback breakdown for the 2025 class. We're going to talk about it. There's a lot of questions about the quarterbacks in the mailbag. We already have some up there. We will be doing a mailbag. Next, we're going to go to Carson's Corner, and then we'll go to the mailbag after that. So Ryan obviously interviewed Carson Hobbs, Notre Dame commit Carson Hobbs, for an interview. And so we are going to get with Carson on that, or have Ryan, we'll play the interview that Ryan and Carson did together. And then when we come out of that, we will then dive into the mailbag. So you can start submitting your questions now for Ryan and I to dive into once we get done with the Carson Hobbs interview. But next we are going to go to the one-on-one that Ryan did with Carson Hobbs in the latest installment of Carson's Corner.
Welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are back here for Carson's Corner. It's now episode 3. Of course, if you haven't missed the first 2, you should go back and check out the Recruiting Hour podcast each Monday that we release, because we get to sit down with, of course, Carson Hobbs, who is a cornerback in the 2024 class committed to the University of Notre Dame out of Archbishop Moeller in the state of Ohio. Carson, what's going on, man? I know we're getting a day later than we usually record, man, but how's the week going so far? How's everything?
Week's been going great. School year's coming to an end, unfortunately. Sad that I'm about to already be going to my senior year. I mean, time flies. But, on the positive note, just won the district prelims, obviously. I mean, it doesn't mean too much. Tomorrow's the finals and districts, and then so we should be able to crush that meet and then roll on to the regionals and hopefully go win this state championship thing.
Well, Carson, I know I don't want to rush this too much because you got a whole school year to go, whole football season, everything. But I remember, man, when I went into my senior year, I was like, where did the last 3 years go? It's just wild. Just kind of blink your eye. Have you had that moment yet where you're just kind of like, dang, man, I'm about to be a senior in a couple of weeks?
I think I had that moment 2 days ago. It was like a hurt moment. It was like, dang, no more. You get to, kick it with your friends on the weekends every time and maybe go hang out with a couple. We going to college, we getting locked in, we getting business done. So I think I've accepted the fact that, like, obviously my life's going to change for the better, and I'm ready to be able to put the work in and just go get it done and do it.
Well, and you come from a great school, obviously, Archbishop Moeller. How much do you feel like they have kind of just prepared you for this? Because, I mean, we've talked about it. You have some teammates that are going to play major college football, obviously, as well. Like, how much do you feel like the high school has been able to help you just kind of with that transitional stuff and make sure that you're ready for that?
Right. I just think it's one of them is just really a blessing. Like, my parents put me in the program. I didn't know what it was going to be like, but leading on to seeing the tradition and the trajectory that they put players not only in NFL but big time colleges. So I understood our school is pretty much like a powerhouse, and I didn't expect to come here and really. I did. I expected to kind of be in the business I am to say today. Obviously not with Notre Dame. That's my dream school, but I'm here and I'm just thankful because I'm not sure, like, maybe if I was at a different school than Moeller, they wouldn't have known if I was like at a public school, if I would have been academically ready. Like, it's a lot that plays part into the recruiting process. So being at the school I'm at today got me, I think, a lot of good recognition that I deserve and that needed to have it too.
They definitely are. I mean, that's like one of the schools when I think of major Ohio football. Archbishop Moeller's like one of the first ones that pop in my head, like that. St. X, like there's a lot of
Yep.
great schools, obviously.
Right.
So, giving a little insight into recruiting today, we'll talk about a couple cool recruiting topics that I think people will get something out of getting a recruit's perspective, a player's perspective. So, I wanted to start us off with you have set your official visit to Notre Dame, which for people that don't follow recruiting, unofficial versus official visits. Basically, the big difference is official visits are multi-days. The schools are paying for all the travel, stay, meals, all that type of stuff. Like they can basically spit the bill for you guys. So not June 9th through 11th that weekend, which is going to be a major weekend in recruiting for Notre Dame. We'll get into some of the kids that are going to be on campus with you. But take me through how you guys, I guess, decided on that weekend being the spot for your official.
So I know the offense has their own weekend, but I could say the defense not only is the 9th through the 11th, but we talked about in the group chat, like I was saying last week, a lot of people are going that weekend, and we got a lot of people to impress and a lot of people to try to get on board. So that's the biggest weekend, and I know I'm one of our recruiters, so I got to be there. I got to pitch the pitch to everybody. I got to tell them, exactly what they need and want to hear. So I think just being able to connect with everybody and going down there is definitely why I picked the 9th through the 11th.
Well, as of right now, if for people that are signed up at boards.irishbreakdown.com, we have a running visitor list of people that we have verified that will be there. Right now, June 9th through the 11th is the largest list we have. I mean, Kennedy Urlacher was obviously committed in your class. I know we're expecting a couple more commits that day. Like you said, a defensive kind of heavy weekend. But right now, of uncommitted players, Anthony Carey, who's a great running back out of the state of Florida, Carter Nelson, super talented tight end out of Nebraska, Elijah Rushing, elite defensive end out of the state of Arizona, Logan Thomas, who is a really talented pass rusher out of Texas, Brian Huff out of Arkansas, the linebacker, Chris Cole, ultra talented linebacker out of Virginia, Bodie Cahoon, who was I had on the list as a non-committed player at the time, but obviously now I have to move him up to the committed list, and then Marquise Gallegos, who's a safety out of California. That's who we have verified for that visit. So, Carson, not only do you have a lot of great defensive players on that list, there's also a couple of really talented offensive players. Just how important is for you to be, obviously we've talked about you being one of the main recruiters in the class, but to be around such talented players and to be able to help the recruiting staff and the coaching staff of Notre Dame to really put forward a good event and good weekend for these guys.
Right. I think it's great. So I think, obviously the best are going to want to play with the best and play against the best. So not only am I going to tell them, that we are the best, but I'm going to tell them that we play the best too. And I feel like, going to Notre Dame is deeper than just the education, which is excellent, amazing. It's one of the biggest reasons you come here. But you got to look at the schedule. I mean, we're playing Ohio State, USC, Clemson, and every single game's on NBC. So I'm just telling these people like, hey, no matter what school you go to, ain't none of them going to be like where you can just tap Channel 5 and you're going to be on every single weekend, 2 o'clock, it could be a night game, but every single time you play, you're going to be on NBC. And that's huge. Yeah. So a lot of these people that have NFL dreams and want to get, they say recognized, that's one of the reasons I did it, especially. My dream was to go to the NFL, but I keep telling these people, like, hey, you could be on NBC making the biggest plays of your life in front of all these NFL teams, getting shout out about Patrick Mahomes, whoever. Brady, they watch these games and they're watching the big ones too. And all the NFL draft analysts and scouts are too, because it's so easy to access. You don't got to go to Big Ten Network. You don't got to go to SEC Network. All you got to do is go to NBC. And with that, that alone is just huge. That's one of the biggest things that you can get, and I think it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, man. I think that it is absolutely massive, the fact that, there's conferences that share a channel to be on, consistently. Notre Dame, they're NBC, baby. Everybody knows that is their deal and that they're always going to be consistently there. So that's a great point. I really think it is. That's a great selling pitch. So let me ask you, when you're talking about the list that we have right now, when you're trying to talk to these guys and really present Notre Dame and give your perspective, are you hopping like player to player? You hanging out with mostly the defensive backs? Like, what's your vibe as far as like talking to some of these guys?
So I only pitch, I pitch to the offensive players, but the defensive vibes, like, and the defensive guys, I like to be around and I like to get to know them. I think when you build a relationship with somebody and you can get close with them in a short period of time, it makes them really feel like they're welcome. So when I went down there and I saw all the commits, like CJ, Cam, and Nias, they all said, "You coming or what?" I'm like, y'all for real? They like, "Yeah, we need you. Come on, get on board." Like that automatically.
Okay.
like I was trying to say. So with the defensive guys, being able to get really close with them, having them relationships with them, I feel like it means so much more to them because maybe other schools players won't take the chance to get to know them, and they might feel like they're going to a program where, hey, I'm going far away from home. I don't really know too many people. I've got to restart, got to make a lot of new friends. When you can make friends and connections before you get to a school, the transition from going one place to another is so much easier. And I feel like that was for me. I'm going away from home, but at the same time, when I get there, it ain't like I'm brand new. Like, we all been friends since the time we all committed. So it makes it a huge difference. It makes it so much a better environment and a real family. And that's like when I'm telling these other recruits that, and they can come kick it with us. We can go to each other's hotels, whatever, go eat together, play the game, go get ice cream, whatever. All that good stuff, it just comes into playing a part of, why, you come to Notre Dame and why these connections matter.
So your past visits, because you've been there a couple times, I know official vibe is going to be a little bit different than like the unofficial trips you've taken, but are there a couple like things that you've done in the past on Notre Dame that you thought was maybe like super unique, or a couple of things that really stand out, like favorite parts? Like, is there just like a couple of things that maybe you've done that you thought was like the coolest parts of seeing the campus and such?
Well, I just think going to the spring practice was like, I got a real reality check of like, okay, this is what it's about to be like, the workouts, everything. But
Sure.
I'm a media guy. I love to get on camera. So I think just changing the picture backgrounds and stuff is fun to me. I love that type of stuff. But all in all, I think really when they put all the commits in certain rooms and let us go in, I think this is it. After we won the Clemson game, when all the commits got to go in the locker room, that was when I realized, when we got to dance with them, do all that. I mean, I loved it. It was one of the biggest wins we had this era. And, we got to turn up with the team like we were already on it. And I felt like it was amazing. And I think that moment right there was like, I'm coming. It ain't nothing stopping me at this point. I'll come in tomorrow. I was so ready after that. And I want another I want another recruit to be able to experience that feeling. Like that feeling of winning on a big stage and a big time, and you coming through with a big win.
Yeah.
Being able to see, everybody's reaction. You look up to the stands, you see the flashlights waving everybody. I mean, it's nostalgic. It really is. It's just an amazing moment.
Yeah, no, that was one of the best games that I can remember, to your point, in like recent history for Notre Dame. It's because those 3 games are set up like that now over the last couple of years, right? Because it's the same. It's Ohio State, USC, Clemson. Those are like the pillar games for Notre Dame, to really show that they're taking the next step. I mean, and it was dominant too, man. It was like 35-14, I think was the final of that game. Like, it wasn't even close. It was
we put that whooping on them today.
Yeah, man. Oh, and hopefully continue that momentum this season, obviously. So, Carson, I love the insight that you give us about other recruits in the class. So let's talk about the 2 most recent commits to Notre Dame from a high school perspective. Obviously, Notre Dame just grabbed a grad transfer defensive back who's a really talented player. But I want to start last Monday. I think it was Monday. I can't remember. It was like last Friday, I think. So not today, but last Friday when we whatever. So Teddy Rizak, who is a linebacker rover out of the state of Nebraska, he commits to Notre Dame. Just early impressions that you've been able to get from him. I know he's probably in the group chat at this point, but just early vibes, opinions, just kind of, because obviously that one happened pretty quick, and Notre Dame fans I know are very interested in what Teddy can bring.
So I think Teddy, regardless, I hope the fans and stuff don't really look at the rankings like that. He's a baller, and he's going to do what a baller does. And Notre Dame's not recruiting people that they don't feel like can be put to play on the Saturdays that we play on. So regardless of rankings, it don't matter. That kid's a baller, and he's got really good speed, and he has really good size. And the way we develop DBs, especially, you see Kyle Hamilton, you see Ben Morrison, Jane Mickey. I mean, it's year after year. And under Mickens and, O'Leary, it's special. So I think he's going to be a really, really good player down the line, and I can't wait to get to, be on the dark side with him.
Yeah, man. Oh, and that's the cool part, is that the last 2 guys are also both dark side guys, both linebackers, both guys that are going to play in that defense, obviously. Second guy, Bodie Cahoon, who is a really talented linebacker, in my opinion, out of the state of Virginia. He picked Notre Dame over offers from Tennessee, Virginia Tech. A lot of the southern teams really started going after him. opinion on Bodie, and if you can give us a little bit of insight into him, because obviously both these guys are in the group chat now, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Bodie, way fast. That's the first thing I told you. He's fast. Fast linebacker. I just saw him close down here. Zoop, zoop. And, not only could he play linebacker, but he could even play rover. We run a 3-3-5. So with that position, you could maybe send him on blitzes, guard him in the slot, make him play Sam if he needs to. But rover, I think rover going to be his position. He's quick, way faster, and he's physical. So he's good. And I think even Urlacher might even come down and play that rover position too.
Yeah. Now Kennedy's obviously a super physical dude, so I could definitely see that. The cool thing about Bodie, and I need to ask you this, because Bodie ran 4.54 electronic time this offseason. You guys are getting a bunch of fast dudes on that defense, man. Like I know people are underrating a couple guys because of recruiting rankings, and we'll talk about that another day, I'm sure. But a lot of fast dudes. My question is, who wins in a race, Carson Hobbs or Bodie Cahoon?
Me. We're all respect to him, but I'm not losing. I don't know if I'm losing to anybody. I'm taking myself over everybody. In a race, I got to. 100%.
I love it, man. I love it. So we need to get you against, I know 2023 also, Notre Dame got some fast dudes. They got Micah Bell, who's one of the fast. Yeah.
Now, look, the 2023s, they got a couple of them that was running 10 threes. I don't know if I'm not beating them, to be honest. But 24, we got a fast class, and that's what they say, like, speed kills. I say speed kills speed. We the defense. So we can beat speed because we got speed. You understand what I'm saying? So that's huge.
Yeah, I'm actually working on an article, actually, Carson, about some of you guys committed in 2024 and some of the uncommitted guys, about some of these track times that you guys have this year, man. It's pretty wild. Some of these extracurricular dudes, like, I mean, Cam just had what he did. I think he did 24 plus in the long jump pretty recently, right? Yeah.
Wild.
You're recruiting a safety named Oliver Miles, who I know Notre Dame's pretty high on, that just did 49 plus in the triple jump, which is just an absolute silly number. Like, that's insane. A safety that was just offered just ran, I think, 10.67 electronic time in the 100, which is obviously a really good time. Lot of really good track times on this roster, which is going to be fun to talk about. So we'll definitely dig into the track, because I'm a track nerd, man. I can dig into that stuff all day, but we'll definitely hit on that in a later episode. Let's turn a little bit to, I guess, more of this is like a perspective type of outlook. And me on the Irish Breakdown podcast, we've been talking a lot recently about the transfer portal for, it's just a general college football topic, but also we've seen some Notre Dame guys enter the last couple weeks. We also saw Notre Dame get a really nice commitment this past week from the Rhode Island transfer, Antonio Carter, who was also on the show. Logan Diggs just transferred. Obviously, he picked LSU. I don't want to really hit too much on Logan, the decision to transfer LSU. I just want to get your perspective, because I think that there was a lot of positives to the transfer portal. I also think there's a lot of negatives to the transfer portal. What is your perspective as a recruit, your perspective on the transfer portal in general?
I think it's a blessing in ways, but I also think it's a curse too. So I think, not only can the transfer portal be used as going to a better school and going to the place that you fit in, it can also be a curse because, say you don't have the best year at the college you're at and you go into the transfer portal looking for a bigger school and you actually end up, dropping maybe, from a Power 5 to like a MAC. I just look at stuff like that and I understand, like, you just got to understand, to every recruit, really, before you commit into a place, make sure it's a place that you feel like this is a place where I can guarantee no matter what happens, I can stay here for the next 4 years. Because if you don't feel like that, then that's just not the right place for you. And you'll be in and out of the transfer portal. One school you'll go, you'll like it, and get in the transfer portal, not like another school. And then, the cycle repeats. So the transfer portal can, it can eat you alive or, it can send you to wherever you want it to go. But, for the JUCO guys and the lower level guys that didn't have the grades, but they had a lot of talent to be able to be on the big, be on the big screen, I think it's really good for those guys because they can go, do maybe a quarter or two, get their GPA all the way up to where it needs to be, academically eligible and go to a huge school and ball out. It happens all the time. So I think that's huge.
Well, and how much have you had maybe talks with just like your parents about like the transfer portal in general? Because again, like ideally You never have to enter because everything's good and you're starting and all the situation is good. But how much of I guess, have you had that conversation with your support system about like just making sure that you kind of dot all your T's and dot all your I's and cross all your T's in that situation?
Right. I guess my parents really are against it. They're more of a older type school, and
Sure.
you got to start what you finished. I mean, you got to finish what you started. So I kind of got that mindset from them. I just feel like don't quit on things just because they're not going out your way in time. Like in life, you're not always going. It gets worse before it gets better. So
Yes.
I always feel like tough times don't last, and if you're not maybe at your fifth or your program, maybe it just takes more effort from you to work harder. It's not always the staff. It's not always the staff. And I feel like that's the issue with people. They won't, take the acceptance that, hey, maybe you just weren't good enough that day and you need to go work harder. So if you keep that mentality and are able to realize that you can always get better and realize that, it's never over. No job is ever set.
Sure.
Always get work to, get on the field and prove it in practice every day. You're going to be good. Because if the school that recruited you believed that, and they saw that in you, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to get on the field.
That's true. It's a great perspective, Carson. I know we'll probably have many more conversations about the transfer portal because things not going away, man. It's sticking around, obviously. So last topic, wanted to leave this kind of a open topic for Carson, a little bit of a wild card topic. We'll just call it a random topic for the podcast. So Carson, I gave you the opportunity to just pick whatever you wanted here. What's something that you kind of want to end this podcast with, a conversation?
NCAA 24.
Let's do it, man. What are your thoughts? Can I say before we start, the last video game was 2014, and I was addicted to it, and I have missed it for the last 9 years. I will put it straight like that. Your opinion on NCAA 14 being back, NCAA game being back, I should say.
I think it's a dream come true, to be honest. To be on a video game as a college player, as a freshman, anybody, only thing I'm worried about is what they're going to start the overalls at. But just being on a video game and having your name out there is just wild to me. And having to be able to make money from it, all the sales they had in NCAA 14, doing this, it could be huge for NIL purposes. I think it's such a smart move for ESPN to let us do that. And whoever let us do it, to be honest, I don't know who. But it being able to come to the college football world as an NIL perspective it's going to be crazy.
Yeah. Well, outside of the earning potential, obviously, of using your name, image, and likeness, how cool is it to just be able to play with yourself on a video game, though?
That's a wild, that's a dream come true. Be able to sit there and control Carson Hobbs. That's wild. Like, it don't feel real to say, but to be able to make sure that can happen is crazy. I just wonder how they're gonna do it, like with schools wise. Like they were talking about having 162 teams. Like, what is your take on that? I don't really know. I was just thinking maybe they do only Power 5. I don't know.
Man, they used to. So I'm trying to remember the NCAA game. They obviously didn't have the names associated with the players. It was just like random number 26 or whatever it is for like what school, right? But I remember they had all the Division I. So they had they had all the FBS teams, right? So they had all the Power 5, Group of 5. And then I remember, I think there was like some FCS schools, but I don't think it was a ton of them. You know what I mean? Like it was just a little bit funky.
Right.
You got to get at least the FBS kids, right? Like all the FBS kids. I think that's 132 teams or so. So like maybe you could do that and then just simulate the FCS schools. Like I don't know though. I mean, like I feel like the FCS schools, like you can't just shun them though, because they are technically Division I now. They are no longer D1 AA. They're just FCS at the Division I level. So it's a little tough, man. Actually, that's a great question.
I'm surprised. I just think it's going to be hard to do 132 kids and have all the teams and have all the names. So I just kind of find it, a little hard. And like you were saying, a transfer portal.
Transfer portal is going to be wild on the game, man.
Be wild. I mean, maybe they're going to have a transfer portal list in the ultimate team where you can say best players out the portal and put them on your team. I don't know. But, I mean, it'll be fun to watch.
And do they have NIL stuff in there, too, as far as, like, NIL deals for kids? Like, in the actual game, not talking about, like, you know what I mean? Like, in the game, it's like – so say you're Notre Dame, for instance, right? And it's like, okay, a guy's in a transfer portal, and you're trying to get him to come. Will they have something like you'll be able to sign an NIL deal with this company and that company for this amount of money if you come as well? You know what I mean?
I think so. I think that's a great point. I think
In my
100%
opinion.
they're going to do that. 100%. That's a
Think
great
so?
idea.
Well, hey man, if the game wants to call me, I can help them out with some collaboration stuff. I don't know, but that's
So you know, I'll be the first one on calling.
love it, man. I love it. But it is going to be really exciting because, again, it's like nostalgic for me because I used to play NCAA a lot more than Madden, to be honest. I only been playing Madden over the last few years because there was no NCAA. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, that was my game. I used to love playing the triple option and recruiting and doing all that type of stuff. But it's going to be fun, man. It's going to be really fun. And luckily, you're going to be like right in time for like the brunt
Right
of it,
in
man,
time.
when it gets started. Yeah.
Same. That's why I'm so hyped. Same year.
Oh man, I can't imagine. I'm thinking about like CJ Carr now getting the quarter QB1 stuff like in the game, like being that's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be dope. It's gonna be dope. There's no doubt. It's like when you see the NFL teams in the locker rooms playing Madden and they're like playing with themselves and stuff.
We're
Like,
gonna be playing
dope,
our own version. We're gonna be playing the college football.
It's wild, man. It's so cool. It really is. I think this was a great topic to end this again. Carson's Corner, episode 3. Carson, as I do every single week, man, where can people find you on all your favorite social media platforms?
Instagram, KRSON, HOBB1, HOBBS1, Carson Hobbs 1, and then Twitter, you guys already know, same thing, Carson Hobbs, just with no 1 at the end. Appreciate you guys for watching, and go Irish.
Yes, sir. Again, make sure you throw a little @ on Twitter would be great. Or if you want to go on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to say that you love Carson's Corner. It's the greatest addition to the Irish Breakdown podcast. We appreciate you all. From Carson Hobbs, I am Ryan Roberts. Thank you all again for joining Carson's Corner on the Irish Breakdown podcast.
All right, that is Carson's Corner. That obviously is Notre Dame commit Carson Hobbs of Moeller High School in Cincinnati, who has been committed to Notre Dame since, when did he flipped during the season, right?
During the season. October, I think. Maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, so a guy that Mike Mickens is very high on. And, like I said, Ryan, one of my big questions about Carson is the speed. And obviously that is that's starting to get better in my, at least what he's doing in the track field. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to do this fall. So that's going to do the recruiting hour. Actually, now it's an hour and a half. We're going to do mailbag next. But before we jump to the mailbag, folks, do us a solid, hit that like button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. I'm serious. You are definitely going to miss out. We've got a lot of things that we're discussing, a lot of things we're diving into, a lot of new features that we have started. We're going to start doing more of. I was able to figure out, Ryan, how to take the All-22 from my iPad and put it into a video that we can then use. Nice. So I'm excited about that. That's going to be fired up. So I was breaking down some film last night, and we'll have some more stuff going on. So there's just so much going on. A great deal, $4.99 for a month, $49.99 for a year. You will not find that kind of deal anywhere else. And it's not a deal. Sign up for $1 and get our product now, and then we're going to ramp it back up next year. This is what our rate is. And as I have said in the past, I have vowed when we started this, we will not raise our rates until we have been in existence for 3 years. We started January 2021, so we're still over a year away from even contemplating if we're going to raise our rates or not. So it's just the rate. You sign up for a month and just give it a test. I promise you'll like it. If you're someone who supports what we do and you want to support us even beyond those normal rates, we do have a booster club. We have a Shamrock Club, Blue Club, Gold Club. They're all different levels. If you sign up for the Shamrock or the Blue Club, you will get a free IB mug. It's IB Club mug. And the only people that have these mugs on the entire planet are IB Club mug members. I don't have one. Ryan doesn't have one. Vince doesn't have one. Sean doesn't have one. Nobody has one except for the people in the IB Club. And if you sign up for the Gold Club, which is the highest level, you'll not only get an IB Club mug, you'll also get an IB Nation or an IB Club T-shirt. So it'll look like this with the green logo on it, and it'll say IB, and then it'll say Club on Gold Club on it, and you can get it in 5 different colors, whatever size that you need. We pay the shipping, handling, all of it, and those are for people who sign up for the Gold Club. So you're definitely going to check that out as well. Let's go to the mailbag, Mr. Roberts, and we are going to start off here with Brandon Plesner. Got a lot of quarterback questions today.
Brandon's question is, as far as 2025 realistic quarterback options, if Deuce Knight was at the top of the board, who are 2 guys you'd have right behind him? Also, is KJ Lacy a legit option in your opinion, being from Alabama and all?
Well, I think he's a legit option. I just think with most of these quarterbacks, Ryan, none of them are really in decision-making mode except for Deuce. I think that's why Deuce gets a lot of the attention is because he's talked about I'm in decision-making mode, so to speak. And he
Yes.
is a high priority target that Notre Dame wants. And I think this is my read of the situation. I haven't been told this by anybody, but I get the impression that Notre Dame has like a group of like A-level quarterbacks. And it's like maybe 3 guys. And if 3 to 4 guys, and if one of those guys wants to commit, they're going to take that guy.
Yeah.
And right now, Deuce is clearly one of those guys, and he is in decision-making mode. So I don't think that there'd be any thought for them of not taking him, and they
Right.
love him a lot. And so is there a ranking of they like this guy more than the other guy? Sure, but it's not to the degree where they would pass on one of those guys for the other. They're all elite level prospects, and they take them all. I mean, I think they're all. I think Deuce Knight, George McIntyre, KJ Lacy, Blake. I got clarification. It's Hebert, Blake Hebert. All those guys are legitimate targets right now. It's just Deuce is the only one that's really in decision-making mode right now. If I were to say would I predict KJ Lacy to Notre Dame today? No, I wouldn't. But there's a lot of guys that Notre Dame has signed that I would not have said as sophomores, rising juniors. Yeah, that guy's going to go to Notre Dame. That's
Right.
what the process is for. And as I said, we'll learn a lot more about what these kids think of Notre Dame once we get into the season and they start to if Notre Dame can put a better. We're kind of assuming like it's going to happen. We think it will, but it's why it's important that Notre Dame does put a really good product on the field this year from an offensive standpoint.
Yep, no doubt, no doubt. I think that is going to quiet any hesitation for some top quarterbacks as well. And the great thing about the top group that Notre Dame's looking at, to your point, Brian, of the KJ Lacy's and Deuce Knights and George McIntyres of the world, is that they're all incredibly talented, right? Like I don't think anyone, at least I'm speaking for myself here, if Notre Dame got any of those top quarterbacks, cool. That's great. Like, I'm not going to be disappointed at all. Like, I'm going to be like, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Like the quarterback depth in 2025 is pretty outrageous, so I think there's just a few really top level guys at the top, and Notre Dame is positioning themselves with a couple of them pretty well. So I like where Notre Dame is with 2025 recruiting, especially at the quarterback position. Next question is from Adam Blair. He said, hey guys, would y'all say Notre Dame is the team to beat for Deuce Knight at this time? It's a great question, Adam. So I would say that Notre Dame is in the top 2 for Deuce Knight right now, in my opinion. I would say right now, Notre Dame and Tennessee are fighting it out for that one. I think Ole Miss is in that top conversation, but I think they're a little bit further behind, in my opinion, compared to a Tennessee and Notre Dame as of right now. So things could change, especially if the recruitment gets extended for whatever reason, if he decides not to make the decision anytime soon. But I think that it's Notre Dame-Tennessee battle right now. I wouldn't necessarily say Notre Dame is the team to beat because I think that those two are pretty neck to neck. So we'll see, obviously, how it figures itself out down the stretch. Next question from Matt McCarthy. He said, is George McIntyre a realistic target for quarterback in the 2025 class? After a few minutes of watching his film, I thought, oh man, this guy is a dude. He can really sling it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like Matt, with a lot of these kids, KJ Lacy, am I calling Notre Dame the leader? No. Is Notre Dame 1A, 1B with a school like Tennessee, like they are with Deuce Knight for those other kids? No. But that's also partly because most of those other kids, like George, are still very early in their recruiting processes. And I think the reason Cutter Boley sped his up is because of the reclassification aspect of it, right?
Yes.
And I think that factors into it. But right now, is he a realistic target? Yes. Do I think Notre Dame is in his top group? No. And what do I mean by realistic then? He's talking to them, and he's still pretty wide open. Right now, they're probably not in his top 4 or 5. Would you say that's accurate, Ryan? But he's engaging with them, and that means that they can climb up that list. And that's what a good season could do for Notre Dame. So there's a lot of kids, Ryan, that Notre Dame has landed that early on they weren't in the top 4 or 5 for. Do you think as a sophomore, Jalen Steed was like, I'm going to Notre Dame? No, pretty sure he wasn't. But they ended up getting him, and that's what the recruiting process is for. So, I mean, we're being as honest as with you guys as we can. Like, they got a lot of work to do with a lot of those guys. And part of it is because Gino Guidugli has only been at Notre Dame for 4 months, right? I mean, that's part of it too. So he's building new relationships with these kids. But so far, I mean, he's getting them interested in Notre Dame. And I think the word you used earlier was perfect, Ryan. He's getting them intrigued by Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Now it's, can you take it to the next level of actual genuine interest? And outside of Deuce Knight, that's what they're working on,
Yes.
right?
He's been to
Establishing with those
campus.
top guys, right?
Because he's been to campus, to your point.
Correct.
I mean, I really think that that's how it happens. I mean, I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I think that there's a lot of kids that are intrigued by Notre Dame, a lot more that end up at Notre Dame. But interest, I think, usually doesn't genuinely happen until guys get on campus. Now, sometimes it does. Sometimes a kid just sees Notre Dame and they're like, yep, like Braylon James is one of those where like, Braylon, it was a formality to go see Notre Dame and to kind of end the process, right? But some kids look at Notre Dame from the beginning and they're like, yep, I'm extremely interested in that school because they hit all the right criteria. But then there's other kids where they see Notre Dame, the academics, the football, the coaching staff, all that great stuff, and they look at it and they say, that's really intriguing. Like it's interesting what they got going on there. But interest doesn't really turn itself to the high level until they finally get to campus. So when they get to campus, that's usually when the interest pops up. So I think a couple of these kids, George McIntyre, KJ Lacy, those are a couple of get them on campus and see what the interest level really is. Because there's definitely intrigue from both sides of it. But are they truly interested in Notre Dame? I think that remains to be seen. We had Matt McCarthy with another question. He said, with Massachusetts producing more blue chip recruits than usual, do you think it can be a Notre Dame pipeline state? They're targeting Gerby Lambert in 2024 and monitoring Blake Hebert in 2025 and Dominic Funk in 2026.
Well,
Matt,
sure. They just landed some guys last year too, obviously, right? You got Preston Center from the state. They really wanted Ronan Hannafin from the state last year. Obviously, was another guy that they wanted from that state. There's been kids that they've been on that they got, some that they didn't get. They tried to recruit Samson Okunlola. They also got Boubacar Traore from the state last year as well as another guy. So they signed 2 kids from Massachusetts last year. Had 3 committed at one point because Ronan Hannafin was a silent commit at one point in time and then ended up going to Clemson. But yeah, it is. So I've talked to, there's some people that are IB members and listeners of the show that are from the area, and they've reached out kind of letting us know what's going on. And you're seeing there's a lot of out-of-state kids coming into the private schools there, but there's also, a climb in talent. I mean, Ronan Hannafin's not an out-of-state kid that's coming there. Gerby Lambert's not an out-of-state kid that's coming there. So it's that combination of an upgrade in talent, but these schools seem to be investing in football, Ryan. I mean, I think it's the biggest part of it is they're hiring good coaching staffs and there's pretty decent playing facilities. I mean, I'm watching all these turf fields and, nice scenery and that kind of stuff with a lot of these places, and they're just putting more emphasis on it. And the result is there's just more kids coming out of there. Not a ton more, but yeah, look, is it a base state in that you're going to get X amount of kids from it every year? No, there's going to be some years where there's really nobody from Massachusetts that you really want. But it is absolutely a state that if they have a top player or 2, you need to be the school that goes and gets them. That was a little bit of my disappointment of why Notre Dame didn't make a harder push at Liam Andrews. Now, I don't know if they would have been able to get Liam Andrews, but they should have made a harder push for him, in my opinion, because he is a talented kid, and those guys are going to be able to fit pretty well. But you also got to make sure that they're guys that can play there too. I mean, they've signed some kids from Massachusetts that I didn't think were very good. Going back to Barry Gallup and John Montelis and guys like that I wasn't. I mean, I know John Montelis was ranked very high. I didn't think much of his film, but yeah, I mean, Bay State, sort of. But Pipeline State, I think the way that Matt said it makes a lot more sense to me because it doesn't necessarily determine that you have to get guys from there every single year. Yeah. It's just when they have top players, you go get them. And I certainly think it can become that for Notre Dame.
Because I do think it's a pretty seamless fit, Brian, to your point, right? It's like if their kid is talented enough and he's a Notre Dame player, the fit usually makes sense because there are a lot of good schools, obviously, in the state of Massachusetts, a lot of good ones. And the football is improving because there's a few schools in that state now where it's like kids are starting to move and flock to a little bit, especially some of the regional schools. So, yeah, as it continues to improve, I think that it could definitely gain some more importance. Notre Dame has already tried to tap into that pipeline a little bit. So being able to establish if there's a kid, 1 or 2 kids every single year, so be it. If there's not, then you don't force it. But because Massachusetts is never going to be like that state where you're like, we need to get 2 guys at least every single year because they always have talent, right? Like it's never going to be that. But if there is a guy or 2 a year that you want, there's no power there, right? Like UMass, like there's no major power. So you should be able to fight the Michigans of the world, the Penn States of the world, like some of those northern powers to be able to get those types of kids. We had a next question from Bailey Brad, who says, last year, after the rough start, it seemed like Notre Dame was holding on for dear life, but this year Notre Dame seems poised for a big year on the field. Do you think this will lead to more flips going Notre Dame's way?
I think, first of all, the holding on for dear life with some kids, sure. But the vast majority of kids in the class were not looking at leaving. There was never any threat that any of the receivers that they got early were going. There was never any threat of Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James. Remember the TCU thing, Ryan, that was being talked about? That was total BS. The Jaden Greathouse to Texas thing, that was total BS.
The Braylon James one still makes me laugh sometimes.
Yeah, Rico Flores, Cooper Flanagan, those guys never second guessed it. The North Carolina linemen, Pendleton and Absher, they never did. Jagasol never did. Otting never did. Drake Bowen never did. Jaden Osbury never did. Preston Zinter never did. Christian Gray never did. Micah Bell never did. Micah Bell got offered by Georgia where his brother goes, and he's like, "No, I'm good." This was like right before, right after, right? Yeah, it was before they won their title, but they were undefeated, #1 team in the country. The Don Schuler never did. Ben Minich never did. Boubacar Traore never did. Devin Houston never did. Brennan Vernon never did. Armel Mukum never did. I mean, I could do this all day, right? Jeremiah Love never did. Once he committed, he was in. So this notion that they had to hold on for dear life with some kids, a small number of kids, sure. But with those kids, honestly, it wasn't about the season. Like Peyton Bowen was a concern for Notre Dame before the season started. Keon Keeley decommitted before, like we all knew they were in trouble with him before the first game of the season. When he made the visit to Ohio State, he had already decommitted because Notre Dame wouldn't allow him to take official visits while still part of the class. So he'd already decommitted since then. Dylan Edwards didn't commit till during the season. And then he decommitted late because of the fact he had like this lifelong relationship with Deion Sanders. That's why he flipped. I mean, this notion that they had to hang on for dear life because of the season, I don't necessarily buy, to be honest with you. But I also would say that it doesn't mean that a big year won't help you if you do want to try to flip some kids. And I think that is something that so the second part of the one, sure, it could. It could certainly help you maybe flip Caleb Beasley down the road. It certainly help you if you miss out on a kid now. Like, let's just say hypothetically that Deuce Knight commits to Tennessee. Keep recruiting him.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Until you get a commitment from somebody else, keep recruiting him. And then you go out there and all of a sudden you're lighting the world on fire. Sam Hartman's tearing it up and Joe Milton's struggling. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, man, all right, this was your question. This was your concern. Rightfully so. Now look what we're doing. And you'll have a better shot at flipping a guy. I'll simply say this, though, Bailey, Brad, I think the big thing for me, though, is I will continue to say that I think the season will have a lot more influence on Notre Dame's ability to impact the 2025 class. Could it maybe impact the Justin Scott or Elijah Rushing? Sure. Could it impact the Caleb Beasley? Sure. A couple guys like that? Sure. But for the most part, I think the really big impact of a season is always on the next class more so than the current class, in my opinion. So we could see it have a really big impact on next year's class if Notre Dame is able to have a really, really good season.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And also the 2025 class, if we're talking about that specifically, you have more time to make that flip happen, right? Like 2024, if you're doing it mid-season, or let's say where you're having like a great stretch and some teams are struggling or whatever, and you're trying to make that flip happen, you only have a couple more months until signing day, right? Like it's a really limited amount of time. So I think that you just have to think of timelines and just ability. And also Notre Dame's not going to be fully filled up most likely, but like they're going to be pretty close to capacity, probably, midway through this 2023 season. So just some things to keep in mind in that regard.
Actually, let's go up here to, we got one up here from Matt McCarthy.
Matt McCarthy says, do you worry about interior defensive line recruiting if Wayfield is the only one they signed in the class? Do you think anyone else committed in the 2023 class outside of Devin Houston could grow into a defensive tackle? I would be terrified.
Sure.
If that was,
absolutely. Well, look, here's a couple things. Number one, am I worried about interior defensive line recruiting? I am. Sean Sevillano's a nice prospect. He's not a needle mover for me, Ryan. He's a nose tackle space eater that's a limited snap guy that maybe can give you some disruptive size. He's not closing the gap. To me, the loss of Justin Scott would be big. There's two things to look at this, Ryan. Number one is we're seeing Notre Dame kind of go the Lou Holtz route with recruiting defense.
Yeah. Yep.
Safeties are being recruited to play linebacker. Linebackers are being recruited to play defensive end, and defensive ends are kind of being recruited to play defensive tackle. Yes. That's one way to put a really athletic defense on the field. Now, that's not true across the board. There are linebackers being recruited to play linebacker, but those are guys that who are they? It's the Drake Bowens, it's the Jaden Ausberries, it's the Jalen Sneeds, the Nolan Zieglers, the guys that are really fast already. But you're seeing Josh Burnhams and Junior Tuiamakas being recruited and developed into defensive ends. You're seeing big ends like Boubacar and Armel Mukam and Brendan Vernon and Bryce Young, who all have frames to potentially grow into interior guys. And then you still do need to recruit some interior guys like the Owen Wafels and the Justin Scott. So I will say this, Justin Scott will be a loss for Notre Dame if they don't get him. And there's no spinning that. The bigger loss, however, won't necessarily be interior defensive line recruiting, because I still think they're going to have a chance to have some really talented players, Owen Wafel obviously being one. I think that there's a chance that Bryce Young, with the frame he has, and if you look at his dad, he's 2 inches taller and maybe 5 pounds heavier now than his dad was as a senior in high school, and his dad became a 6'3", 300-pound Hall of Fame defensive tackle in the National Football League. Right. So could he end up being a 295-pound version, like a Jason Onye type? Absolutely. And matter of fact, Bryce looks a lot like Jason Onye did as a rising senior in high school. So I can see that. And so you'd be okay there. It's more, the bigger thing for me more is, Ryan, is just the perception of it. Yeah. That you went and literally got beat in your backyard.
Yes.
Of a kid that basically you bungled the recruitment, recovered for a time, and then couldn't close the deal, is basically what it would signify to me. And if you lose them to Georgia, okay, I get it. You lose them to Michigan, that's a slap in the face. You lose them to a place like Miami, give me, come on, what are we doing here?
5-7 or whatever.
Yeah. Look, if Justin decides other things are more important to him and he wants to go to Miami, he has that right. It is what it is. All good. Move on. If he decides to go play for Michigan, it is what it is. You move on. But it is a big red flag for me if I'm looking at it and I'm looking at defensive line recruiting and I'm like, look, they're going to get some really good players, but let's just say they get Elijah Rushing. The reality is your success rate on highly ranked kids that you should have landed is very low in the 2 years since Al Washington got here. You lost Keon. You lost Jason Moore, should have landed both of them. And, you're losing a guy like Justin Scott. Like, that's just not one you should lose. I'm sorry. There's just no excuse for that. That impacts me greater, even more so, Ryan, than whether or not you'll be able to have a really good defensive interior, right? I mean, that's the thing for me. But it also hurts you there as well. And if you can't dominate up the middle, you're going to have a hard time being a dominant football team. But will Notre Dame still be okay up the middle? I think so. I do. I think they're recruiting enough big ends that the Tyson Fords, the Boubacars, the Armel Mukams, the Bryce Youngs, the Brendan Vernons that could eventually grow into big guys, they're still going to be good up there. But that guy's 6'5", 310 now.
Exactly.
And that's the big difference for me, is there is a need to find some guys like that are just 300-plus athletic type of guys. And could they have a pretty darn good defensive line without him? Sure. Does he help you if you can develop him, have an even more next level defensive line? Yes, he can. And eventually you got to start landing those guys. And if you can't land one in your backyard, you got to figure out either A, we just have no capacity to land elite defensive linemen right now. Just we can't. There's nothing we can do. Or you got to ask yourself, do we have the right people in place? And It's not just Al Washington, because to really get this job done, it's got to be Al Washington, it's got to be Marcus Freeman, but it also has to be the defensive coordinator. And I don't know that I have heard of Al Golden going out to that high school. I don't, it's just, there's so many red flags where you're just like, this has to be fixed. And if they miss out on this kid, I don't want to hear all the spin about, well, he just got into NIL. It should never have gotten to that point.
Yes.
And that's the thing that we'll continue to go back to. It's just that it would be more inexcusable from a perception and the logistics of it all, more so than, gee, this is devastating. They can't have a good defensive line now. That would be where I would come from.
I would say too, just to add to that a little bit, Brian, that my biggest concern would be there are some players that could project potentially into interior defensive line, but there's no foregone conclusions that happens, right? Like there's no guarantee that Armel Mukum will be an interior defensive line. There's no guarantee that Boubacar will be one. There's no guarantee that Brennan could be one. Right. Could they? And
sure.
Law of averages, is it a decent chance that one of them at least does? Yes, but it's still different than getting a guy that foregone conclusion could be an interior defensive lineman. Like he's a guy that can fit, no doubt about it.
But here's what I don't think any of them will be, Ryan. 6'5", 310 pounds.
That's my point.
6'5", right? You know what I mean? Like
interior defensive lineman.
Even if they become natural interior defensive linemen, like a Jason Onye, there's a difference between a 6'4", 295-pound Jason Onye and a 6'3", 300. Well, how big was Jalen Carter? Right, wasn't he like
310 or something like that? Yeah.
I mean, that's a different deal. I mean, that's a different type of body right there. Yep. And so that's kind of the thing that I'm looking for. He measured in at 6'3", 314 at the combine, and I think that was down a little bit. I think he played it over 320. At least that's kind of what I had read some places. But that's a different body type than a Jason Onye. And give me 3 Jason Onyes and then 1 Justin Scott body type. That's what I need. You know what I mean? And so, give me 2 to 3 Jason Onyes, a Justin Scott, and an Owen Wafel body type, and I'm going to have a heck of a D-line. Right now, they're getting the Owen Wafels and the Jason Onyes, which is great. That's great.
Really
but
great,
they need to be able to go get these guys. And here's the thing. It's hard to land these guys because most of these guys are from Florida, Georgia, places that aren't real favorable for Notre Dame. This kid is from a Catholic school in Chicago, and it's just one that you need to get. So, yeah, am I worried about it? I'm not worried about it because I think they're going to have a good defensive line with the kids that they have. Is it a problem? Is it a concern to where you need to say it's got to get better? Yes, it does.
Especially if you don't find any other answers outside of Justin too, because in this hypothetical, it's just Owen is the only guy that like foregone, right? So, I mean, they could potentially pivot and find another guy that's like, oh, wow, that guy's really good. Nice. You got an interior defensive lineman. That's awesome. But if you only land Owen as your only true interior defensive lineman in the class, it's disconcerting. Like it's a little.
And I don't know if landing Sean Civiliano does it for me as far as easing my concerns. I get that. What I would rather see, Ryan, is, and this is like, because we're having this debate on the board about, should you take, if you get Logan Thomas, should you, and you get Malachi Williams, you still take Elijah Rushing? And the answer is like, no, you can't take all that. It's like 6 defensive ends in a class. You can't take that many defensive ends in a class. This is real life. This isn't fantasy land. This isn't NCAA 2024. This isn't those things where you just load up and figure it out. That's like so impractical. Well, the numbers always figure themselves out. At the 85 level, they do, but not at a position group. Because if you take that many guys, you're going to have too many guys at that position. That's just the reality of it. The exception would be is if you felt Bryce Young was an interior guy. Like then I could maybe have that conversation with you. Yeah. Because now it's like, okay, now I've got maybe Cole Mullins is now my field end, which I believe Notre Dame wants to be a more athletic, disruptive pass rusher type. Cole can play that position. Now you've got Logan, Malachi, and Elijah as your 3 Vipers. And we've said in the past, Elijah could potentially grow into a field end as well.
Oh, yeah.
So now you're a little bit more balanced. But if you also have Bryce Young as an outside guy, you signed 3 outside guys in this class, or excuse me, you'd have 5 outside guys in this class, 3 in last year's class. That's 8 guys in 2 years. You're going to lose guys. And here's the problem. Well, you lose guys, you replace them. Here's the problem. The problem is when you lose them, it's going to be after next year's class basically gets put together, and it's going to be harder to recruit next year's class. And that's the challenge, right? And so, but at the end of the day, they're not going to get all those guys. It's just not practical. Having said that, if you were to tell me that by the time Bryce Young is done with his career in high school, he's 275. And you're able to get like Logan Thomas and one of Malachi or Elijah Rushing to go with interior Bryce, interior Owen with Mullins, Thomas, and one of those two guys at end. I'm going to have a problem with the Justin Scott loss, but I'm also going to be like, they put together a pretty darn good defensive line class.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's going to be a difference of you didn't do a good job with the Justin Scott recruitment, which happens, and I'll criticize that, but then also say, but hey, I really like what Al Washington did. Look at the class he put together. And now it's just, hey, but let's also add Justin Scott next time. There's a difference between that and then you don't get Justin Scott, you don't get Malachi, you don't get Elijah Rushing, and all of a sudden you're like, missed opportunity.
Yes.
Now I have bigger picture questions. So that's why I say, am I worried about D-line recruiting? Talk to me when we know what Justin Scott, Malachi Williams, and Elijah Rushing and Logan Thomas are all going to do. Because if you give me two of those guys, I actually can live with that if they were to miss on Justin Scott down the road. And again, we don't know that they're going to miss on Justin Scott. We don't. There's a lot of overreactions to this thing. I'm very concerned about it. My sources are not as nearly concerned as I am. I'm a follow the actions, and I just have a hard time. Because do you know by the time the season starts, if Justin Scott does not come in June, and as of right now he's not, he will have been at Miami and Georgia both more times than he was at Notre Dame.
It's wild, man.
I'm not going to get burned again like we did last year. That's my whole thing. I'm going to tell you what my sources are telling me, but then I'm going to tell you what my opinion is. And I hope that I'm wrong and that my sources are right. And I hope, and I'll tell you, if he visits at some, because like, here's the thing, he's got all his weekends planned. Bro, you're an hour and a half away. If you really like Notre Dame, come down on a Wednesday.
You go down for a day trip. You don't have to spend overnight and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And then you can still save your official for the fall, which I'm okay with. I'm okay. I don't care that and here's the other thing. I do not give two rips about whether or not he uses an official visit this summer. Matter of fact, I hope he doesn't use an official visit to Notre Dame this summer. I hope he uses it for the Ohio State weekend or the USC weekend. But you got to at least come on an unofficial at some point. And if you don't, then and I got this is not I don't have any ill will towards Justin at all. He's got to do what's best for him in his future. My point is, as I'm an analyst trying to get a read on this, I can't justify telling you all that, hey guys, don't worry, everything is perfectly fine if he doesn't make another visit to Notre Dame, in-person visit to Notre Dame this summer. I'm just going to have a really hard time believing that and then sharing that with you all. I just have to be honest. If he doesn't make another visit to Notre Dame, unofficial or whatever, this summer, my doubts about my optimism that they're going to get Justin Scott are slim. And it just tells me that he just likes other schools more, which is fine. I have no beef with Justin. None of this is a criticism of Justin Scott. If Justin Scott decides NIL is a lot more important to him than we had previously believed, okay, whatever. This is your life, buddy. This is your decision. You got to do what you got to do. It's just one of those things where I still don't think Notre Dame would have done it right, but there's still plenty of time left. And if he committed to Miami or Michigan tomorrow, the only problem that I would then have with Notre Dame is if they just stopped recruiting him. That would be the only problem I have, because I don't care where a kid commits now. I care about where a kid signs. And that's a lot more. I would much rather him commit somewhere else and sign with Notre Dame than commit to Notre Dame and sign with somebody else, obviously. So that's kind of where I'm at with that one.
Yep.
All right. Let's I mean, we get asked that a lot. I'm at the point now where I'm just like, look, I've got nothing else to say about Justin Scott. We'll see what happens when he visits or not. That's kind of where I'm at.
So, someone said on my post this morning, give me some good Justin Scott news. I'm just like, he's a good player.
He's really talented. He's a good kid. I mean, I got no Justin Scott from everything I've ever heard is a good kid. Not every kid that doesn't look at Notre Dame is like all of a sudden a bad kid or doesn't care about this or doesn't care about that. If he goes to Miami, he doesn't care about academics. Miami's a pretty darn good school. You know what I mean? Like, so we don't need to like tear a kid down and he's not really a good kid. It's just sometimes kids have other interests and sometimes the school doesn't do a good job selling themselves. And I think that's really what's going on. I think Justin Scott loves Marcus Freeman. And I was talking to Sean Davis about this. And, Sean had said to me, if this was just about the head coach, this is a no-brainer. I was like, but that's the problem.
It's not. Yeah,
it's not. Look, I don't care how much you love Marcus Freeman. You're playing for him, but you're really not playing for him. You're more playing for Al Washington than Al Golden. And if they don't do the job, and it's again, we're going to focus on Al Golden Al Washington because he's a position coach. But I have as many concerns about Al Golden as I do Al Washington, if not more so. And he also plays a big role in whether he will play a big role in whether they do or do not get Justin Scott, in my opinion. And so he's got to step it up as well.
No doubt about that. Question from Matt McCarthy, who says, could Logan Thomas or Malachi Williams play Rover, or are they strictly Viper defensive ends? Matt, so they're definitely not Rovers. So I think one difference between the two is that Malachi, I think, has a frame where you look at him and say, at around 6'5", he could grow into maybe being a field end eventually. We'll see.
He could look a lot like Javonte Jean-Baptiste when it's all said and done, Ryan.
Yeah. But right? I think so. But I think Logan Thomas is a kid where he's a Viper, but he could also do some of the 3-3-5 stuff, playing like that Viper Sam linebacker type of role as far as like working off ball. So they're very different players, Matt. Logan's much more 3-4 outside linebacker, guy that can play in space a little bit more, can also rush off the edge. Malachi is a true edge. Like, you don't want him dropping in space a ton. He's a guy that's going to come after the quarterback. So both Vipers on Notre Dame's board without question, but I wouldn't be shocked if Malachi Williams was maybe a field end eventually. But obviously there's a lot of projection to the frame that needs to happen.
Yeah, I'm curious to see kind of how this defense evolves the next couple of years, Ryan. Because I do think that Notre Dame needs to get away a little bit from – they either need to do one of two things. They either need to make the field end a big power guy and the Viper more of a true hybrid player where you can easily get in 3 and 4 man fronts, no problem. Or if you're going to still be a primary 4-man team, you need more of a disruptor at field end. One of those two things to me needs to happen. And so I feel like right now Notre Dame is moving towards a little bit of being able to do a little bit of both, to be honest with you. They got some of these big ends that could play in those looks. And then you've got some Vipers that can kind of drop, and Logan Thomas is more of a Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka type of Viper.
Yeah.
Whereas Malachi Williams is more of an Isaiah Foskey type of Viper. I'm actually okay with having a couple different types of Vipers because Cole Mullins is a lot more like the Isaiah Foskey type of Viper. Because those type of guys give you some flexibility to where you can play, for example, you could play Malachi Williams and Logan Thomas together at Viper as a rotation, and in the very same game, go to certain looks where, to your point, Ryan, when Malachi's 6'5", 260 down the road, where you put them on the field together, opposite each other as well. And I like that diversity. I do. I like having those kind of players. And we're talking about Malachi now, but that's also why if they're able to get Logan Thomas, I'd be really excited about a Logan Thomas, Cole Mullins type of 1-2 punch, because you can use them together both at Viper, but you can also put them on the field together because I think Cole can do some things down the road where he can be an athletic Javonte Jean-Baptiste sort of disruptive field end as well. And I like that combination. I do.
Next question is from Andre Tonsel. What's up, Andre? I think most high-level quarterbacks throw to spots on the field. Do you believe this to be correct?
In the NFL, yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the NFL, that's almost all you're doing, really. I mean, except with these like deep balls, like one-on-one, I know where I'm going, deep balls.
Yeah, it's anticipation.
You're throwing to a spot. I mean, Steve Young used to talk about this all the time in like the West Coast. Like he would talk about throwing blind. You're just throwing the ball to a spot, and the anticipation is that it's your receiver's job to get there.
Yep.
To a degree. It doesn't happen as much in college, though, Andre, especially like in the air raid stuff. You don't see as much of that. But like in a pro-style system, which I think Notre Dame wants to be more of a pro-style offense, there is a notion to that. I mean, you're throwing sail routes, Ryan. You're throwing that ball out to the spot, and you're letting the guy run underneath it. That's the reality of it. And so there will be some of that and much more of that at Notre Dame than there will be at like USC, for example. Doesn't mean it's not at USC, but at USC, you're picking more ISOs. This is where I'm going with the football. And so, but even then, you're always throwing to. I mean, if you're throwing an out cut, you're throwing an out cut to a spot, not to a man.
Yep.
And so those are the different aspects of it. But yes, it's a little bit different in my opinion.
There's also very few NFL quarterbacks that are see it, throw to it type of quarterbacks. I mean, like Deshaun Watson's probably the most successful one as far as like not being incredibly anticipatory, but like when he sees it, he can hit the spot. You know what I mean? Like it's a pretty rare thing on the NFL level because
that's also why
so much faster, so much quicker.
That's also why Deshaun Watson was a bit of a turnover guy in college. Like a lot of people think that his turnovers in college were just because he took a lot of chances, and he did. But he also, to your point, Ryan, is a little bit of that. He's not a great anticipatory guy. I don't know what he is in the NFL, but there was some of that in college as well. Still a heck of a player, though. I wanted to address something here real quick, Ryan, that people are asking about in the chat. The Jordan Seaton news. So basically, Jordan Seaton's a top 100 to 150 offensive lineman in the 24 class. He was at a Rivals event yesterday wearing Notre Dame gear, loves Notre Dame. I think he would like to come to Notre Dame. Notre Dame is not recruiting him. Has not been recruiting him. I don't know if it would even make sense for them to recruit him now because I project him more as an interior guy. Is when I watch this film, Ryan, I see more of a right tackle guard type of guy. They need tackles. They've already got those kind of guys. I also don't think that I'll just say this and we'll move on from it because they're not recruiting him. I don't think it's a film decision as much as there's other factors involved. And then we'll just leave it at that and move on. So it sounds like the kid's just a big Notre Dame fan. He's a Notre Dame fan. And that's just really what it boils down to.
And in the NIL era, man, everyone's talking about him right now because he wore a Notre Dame shirt. So good for him. Right. His name's getting out there more. So
yeah, I mean, and he's a highly ranked guy with some really impressive offers and stuff like that. But Notre Dame, somebody asked if they're getting any traction with him. They're not trying to get any traction with him.
Right.
So the answer to that would be no. They're not getting any traction with him. But I just wanted to address that because there's people talking about it, and it's a fair. I mean, look, you see a kid show up in Notre Dame gear saying "Go Irish," and I'm always repping Notre Dame, and all, you're like, hold on a second, and then you go look at the kids. You're like, this kid's pretty highly ranked, and I pop into film. I'm like, this kid's got some pretty good film, and he's from DC, and you're like, what's the deal? And then you kind of figure out what's going on, and you move on. But they're not recruiting him.
We had our next question from John Leahy, who says, will they take 2 quarterbacks in 2025 class, or is that not something they can do?
I mean, I think there's an opportunity for it. You're not going to take KJ Lacy and Deuce Knight. You're not going to get both of those guys. But if there was a situation where they could get Deuce Knight or KJ Lacy or one of those top guys and say, hey, listen, we need a second quarterback.
Could you imagine if you got KJ Lacy and Deuce Knight in the same class? I
mean, it'd be great for recruiting rankings, but you're not keeping either those two guys more than a year together. I mean, that's the reality of it. But if you could go out and get a kid who's maybe got a toolsy kid that not a lot of people know about, that you maybe steal from like the kid from last year that I would have loved to have done that with, the kid from Texas that went to BC. Like if I could have got him and Kenny Minchie in the same class, I'd have been like, hey, that would be pretty good. Give me that raw toolsy kid that needs some work. I'd be okay with that. Because numbers wise, it would make sense to have there's going to be a year where you're going to have to get a portal guy that provides depth, or you're going to have to get a second quarterback. And it's got to be a kid. It's got to be the right kid though, Ryan, because if you get that kid and he leaves after a year, it doesn't help you. It's got to be a kid that just wants to be at Notre Dame and knows he's going to get his chance down the road. And, the other thing too is, like, you think about the year they got Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa. Well, they got Mac first, I believe. I could be wrong on that. Actually, I'm going to look that up and see that. But I thought they got Mac first and then got Tua later. So, and Mac was from a big school. I mean, he went to Bowles in Jacksonville. That's a big time school. And he eventually became a top 200 player with some people, but not everybody even then had him that high. So let me find this. Who did they get first? Yeah, they got Mac Jones in June, and then Tua jumped in. When did Tua jump on board? Let me see here. Who is the other quarterback in that class? No, I'm sorry. When did Tua commit to Alabama? They don't have it here. They don't have it listed here. So I'm going to have to go out and find that. But yeah, they Trying to find when Tua committed to Alabama. Usually they have the date when the kid committed, but it's not here. So just give me a second to find that. But I think that Mac Jones committed first and they got Tua later, but I could be wrong. People in the chat might know the answer to that. Ryan, does anybody answered that first? Usually the folks in the chat will be like, no, this will happen. So you guys are yeah. So let me just try it. Let me see here. Tua actually picked them first. He committed in May, and then Mac Jones second. So that actually makes me feel a little bit better that they could maybe get a guy like Deuce Knight or KJ Lacy or George McIntyre and then add someone else later. That's a good player that may be willing to wait, because Mac Jones knew he was going to have to wait. I mean, he was going to compete with Tua, but he knew he was going to have to wait if he couldn't beat Tua out. But if the guy's a stud, he may be a three-year guy, and then you've got 2 years to be the starter. It's hard to find those guys, but if they can find them, I'm okay with that. And I think that would be the year where it would make a lot of sense, Ryan, to kind of solidify your numbers. But you'd have to get a guy that understands, if you don't win the starting job, are you going to stay? Right. You got to have that conversation. You're going to get a chance to compete, and we care about putting the best guy on the field. If that's you, then you're going to play. We don't play guys based on recruiting rankings. We're going to play the guys that gets the best chance to win. If that's you, great. But if it's not, are you going to leave after a year or two, or are you going to stick it out? That's the thing. Now, look, you can't the kid could change his mind, but you need to be honest and have that conversation with him to where at least you can feel like you've got mom and dad on board and the kid on board. Understand that this is going to take some time, but this is where we are. I would like to see. I think 25 might be the year to do that. I would actually consider in 24 if you can find the right guy. To be completely honest with you,
I know. I like that one. I like that one kid. Was he from Cathedral? Danny O'Neill, but now he's going to Colorado. I was like, I'd love to take Danny O'Neill with CJ Carr, but
and it would have helped solidify the depth chart. But it's just hard to do that. It is. It really is.
Next question is from Archer. What's up, Archer? What are your prototype body types, athleticism traits for each position? For example, for each position, Archer, are you crazy, man? We could do a whole podcast on this. For example, quarterback, 6'3", 225 with the big arm, or 6 foot, 205 with mobility and elite accuracy, all-purpose back or bruiser at running back, etc.
Yes. I mean, here's the deal, Archer. In college especially, every coach, in my opinion, has certain things they look for. Right? Like you have things you like. I personally like bigger receivers. That's my thing. But you also have to be willing to say, but I can't just have big receivers. I need to have some complementary skills. That's what I loved about last year's receiver class, Ryan. It was even like with Rico and Jaden Greathouse, where there's some carryover between their skill sets, there's still differences.
Yeah, different sizes.
And Caleb Smith is completely different than those two, and Braylon James is completely different than those two. Yes. So at skill positions like that, I need some diversity. At running back, can you have a running back of 5 guys do the exact same thing? Sure. You can do that. Alabama did that for years. I mean, let's be honest. There wasn't a huge difference between like TJ Yeldon and Eddie Lacy. I mean, they were all executing the same run game. You know what I mean? It was like Logan Diggs and Audric Estimate. They're different backs, but they're the same back. If you know what I mean. Like they have different styles and strengths and stuff, but they're running the same plays. You don't have to prepare for anything different.
Right.
But if I got Audric Estimate and Chris Tyree, I better be running different stuff with them. And then that can make it harder to prepare for. I like that kind of guy. I like what Dylan McCullough said is like, look, I'm going to have there's like 5 to 8 different roles for running back. And if I got 5 guys that can handle those 5 roles and we're playing 5 running backs, that's never going to happen. It's not realistic. But the point that he was making was, if I got a guy that's a lead back, but Ryan, if I got another guy that's a good third down back, a good pass blocker, pass catcher, then guess what? On third down, I'm putting that kid in the game and not going to feel bad about it.
Sure.
I like a diversity of skill. There are overall traits that I think this Notre Dame staff values that I think are very important, and one of them being length. Now, some people think length equals height, and it doesn't.
Not always.
It can, but it doesn't. Especially at the skill positions, like a corner. A 6'2" corner with 29.5, 30-inch arms is not going to be as effective as a 5'11" corner that's got 33, 34-inch arms, right? I mean, that's just, it's or maybe it's equal depending on the type of route. Deep ball, same, but driving on stuff, you want the longer guy. Linebacker length is very important. I don't care if it's a 6-foot guy or a 6'5" guy. I've seen 6'4" guys with short arms, and I've seen 6'1" guys like Jeremiah Usukorma with very long arms. But length is very important for a host of reasons. Those are body types that I think Notre Dame covets. They really like length on the defensive line. That's obvious that they like that. Athleticism, sure, for each position group, there's going to be important aspects to it. We should maybe do a show on that one of these days where we break down each position group. These are the strengths and the things we look for. Quickness, change of direction is more important in some positions than others. I can't recruit a linebacker who can't change direction well. I have no problem recruiting a nose guard who's a straight ahead guy. I mean, if he can do other things really well, you can live with that. Other positions, it's like, I can't do that. I can't recruit a tight-hipped corner. I can live with a tight-hip safety because I just know what I'm going to use him to do. Can't have a tight-hipped corner, not in this defense. You can maybe in like cover 4 defense, maybe, cover 2 defense, maybe, but not in this defense. So, yeah, there's all types of things like that. But at the same time, in college more so than in the NFL, Ryan, you're more willing to say that guy's just a really good football player. There is not much about Jaden Ausberry that is prototypical other than his speed. He doesn't have great height. He's got good length, but not great length. He's pretty athletic, but not like elite twitchiness. But you know what he is? He's a heck of a football player.
Smart. Yeah.
I mean, he just makes, and there's something to that, Ryan. Like Jonathan Vilma fits like almost no middle linebacker molds. He was like 225, and back 225 back in 2000 was tiny for a Mike linebacker. But you know what he was? Heck of a football player and a physical football player that just didn't fit the molds. He just was too good to not love at that position. Yeah. So there needs to be that where you could have a guy in the NFL that's a really good football player that just gets exposed constantly because he just can't run well enough or doesn't have the length or whatever. In college, you can get away with that a lot more, which is why you see college stars go to the NFL and do nothing. It's not always because they don't work hard or they have issues. Sometimes it's just like, my weaknesses could not be exposed in college, but in the NFL, they're exposed nonstop. Because it's still a different game.
I mean, think about Darian Kendrick's a guy that I think is a decent example that played at Clemson and then he played at Georgia. He was a good player at both spots. I mean, really good player at Georgia's last year. He went to the combine, ran 4.7 something. Like how many corners are you watching that run 4.7s are successful? I mean, that really is what it is. So I think the margin for error is obviously a lot bigger when you're talking about a college game, which was why I think you can rely on physical traits a little bit more. The NFL, it's very anticipatory. You got to be on time. You got to be in the right spot. You got to be able to, because you're going against who are as good or better athletes than you all over the field. So the margin for error shrinks and continues to shrink and continues to shrink. I mean, in Archer, I was joking when I said this question. When I said your question out loud, but literally I could probably do a 3-hour podcast on just this topic because there are biases we love. There are things that we look for. There are things that we love at certain positions. But, man, you can't ask me a question right now and expect like a 5-minute answer, man. That's going to take a lot longer than that.
Especially, Ryan, because it's going to change from team to team. Things that Alabama's going to look for are not going to necessarily be things that Notre Dame looks for and vice versa, right? Like defensive line. Their interior defensive line, Alabama needs different things than what Notre Dame tends to look for because they play different systems. Georgia cannot afford to play a bunch of Jason Onyes on their defensive line. That's just they'd have to change how they play.
And
Notre
Howard
Dame
Cross they can't play Howard Cross on their defensive line.
They'd have to put him at like defensive end. That's the only place they could put him, right? I mean, he can't play there. To your point, that's a great example, Ryan. That's a great example. Yeah. But he was eating up South Carolina because of how Notre Dame uses him, right? And so that's the other part of it too, Archers. It's going to vary from team to team. I think the point you made, Ryan, is good. In college, you can get away with being smart and not overly athletic. You can also get away with being really athletic and not overly instinctive. You can be neither one of those guys more often than not in the NFL and be successful. There are some positions where you can be that way, but in any kind of skill position, you have to and this is one of the big misnomers. I've said this before. You don't have to be fast to be a great receiver in the NFL. But one of the big misnomers is that, not fast equals not a great athlete. They can be two completely different things. Jerry Rice was not fast. Jerry Rice was an elite athlete. Cooper Kupp is not fast. He's an outstanding athlete. There's a difference. You can't be slow of speed and slow footed and not be able to jump and be a great receiver, right? Cooper Kupp's not fast, but he's very quick. He's very sudden. He's and on top of it, like people have this thing like with him and Devontae as well, they're just really smart. Well, yeah, they are. And they're just fundamentally sound. Yeah, they really are, but they're also outstanding athletes. They're just not fast. Will Fuller was fast, but he wasn't a great all-around athlete. He wasn't overly explosive. He had slow 20-yard. He was like a 4. His shuttle time was almost the same as his 40 time, if I remember correctly, Ryan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Because he was more fast than he was, super shifty. Now, he could cut like a one cut and go, but he wasn't out in the middle of the field like juking people like a Reggie Bush or a Peter Warrick. And then Peter Warrick, to me, is the exact opposite. Peter Warrick was an elite athlete. He was just slow, compared to the NFL. It didn't hurt him in college, but I do think it hurt him in the NFL a little bit. Yeah, Will Fuller ran a 4.32, Ryan, in the 40-yard dash and a 4.27 in the 20-yard shuttle. And he's only a 33.5-inch vertical, which is not bad, but it's not super explosive either. He just was fast.
Yes.
He was a good athlete that was really fast. And other guys are elite athletes. They're just not fast. And there's a difference. So,
yeah, sometimes you have both, but that's a
right.
very rare one.
Right. Exactly. And when you can get those guys that are also smart, yeah, that can be fun to watch. That can be real fun to watch.
Next question from Tim B says, who are the incoming freshmen coming in the fall that are most likely to impact the depth chart this year, offense and defense?
Well, we're gonna have a full show on that, Tim, here at some point in time over the summer. But just real quickly, I think the guys that the first couple guys that pop in our heads, and I will speak for Ryan a little bit on this because we've talked a lot about it. But the first one is Jeremiah Love and Charles Jagasaw. It's the first group of guys that we would talk about. Guys that and Tim O'Malley had a really interesting article about this at Irish Illustrated. We talked about over the last 10 years, the majority of impact freshmen that Notre Dame had have actually not been the early enrollees. It's been the summer guys. Benjamin Morrison was a summer guy last year. He was not an early enrollee. And I thought that was very fascinating. And so Jeremiah Love will be in that conversation. Charles Jagasaw will be in that conversation. I just have a weird feeling that one of the D linemen is going to, at some point in time, make his presence felt as you know what I mean? I feel like it, but I mean, a lot of the guys that weren't early enrollees are at positions where you just don't see a lot of freshmen making an impact. O-line. I mean, there's 4 offensive linemen coming in early. There's 3 defensive linemen. So like 7 of the 13, 10, 11. Actually, no, it's actually not even that much. You have a running back, a receiver, 4 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, a corner. That's it, right? That's coming in.
Yeah.
7 of them are linemen. And then you have Micah Bell at corner. All the linebackers are here. The rest of the DBs are here. Caleb Smith at receiver. Jeremiah Love at running back. That's it. Cooper Flanagan. That's the other one.
Cooper.
So there's 11.
Cooper might be in that sneaky guy to look at as far as his position on the depth chart.
Especially with all the injuries. He's going to get reps early on, Ryan, because Eli Raren's not going to be practicing. Who knows what's going on with Kevin Bauman. But yeah, he's going to get opportunities. There's no doubt. But I think to me it's Love and Jagasaw, the first 2 that pop in my head. I'd love to see like Armel or Brendan Vernon or Boubacar make an impact as well. And with Micah Bell's speed, I just think Micah Bell right now is more of a track guy that's learning to play football than a natural football player. Like Christian Gray is more of a natural football player.
Yeah.
It kind of ties back to our last question. I mean, there's nobody with more explosiveness on this roster in this class than Micah Bell. But there's just a lot of guys that are way ahead of him from a football standpoint right now. You know what I mean? And that's going to be the thing that determines whether he's going to play as a freshman or not. He may just be one of those guys you're like, look, we got to get him returning kicks or something. He's just too fast not to play some capacity.
Yeah.
But he'll need some work. Good question, Tim. Good question. Got another one from Tim, Ryan.
Tim says, what are the criteria that Notre Dame uses when assessing talent? Do you start with measurables and move to film, for instance?
Well, I think there's a lot of different factors that you have to look at in your first initial glance. So the way that it works, Tim, is usually is you do an initial glance of a kid. Okay, first thing I look at, okay, does he have the academics? If a coach says, hey, we're going to look at this kid, I say, okay, first thing I want to do is I want to see his transcript. And I'd look at his, this is what I would do as a recruiting director. I would look at his transcript and say, don't waste your time. There's literally nothing this kid could do the next 2 years to get us into school. And then I could say, like, okay, this is a little shaky. How good is this kid? And, that coach better have something good to say. So there are certain things you can say, hey, look, this kid's a great player. Okay, what's his size? Well, he's an offensive center. Coach, he's a great kid. He's dominant. He's this. Okay, what's the size? Well, he's 6'1", 230. No, we're not. I don't care. I got a good buddy of mine that coaches at the FCS level. I'm gonna give him a call. We're gonna help this kid find a spot because he's a heck of a football player, but he's 6'1", 230. He's never gonna be that guy for us. And then you dive into the film. I mean, so there's certain things you look at right away that are just that you look on a sheet of paper as you're getting ready to talk about a kid that can be no, we can't do that. After that, you start to look at that's when you dive into the film for me. The measurables are part of the conversation to a degree, but you don't start eliminating kids because of measurables unless it isn't a bizarre measurable. I have a corner who's 5'6". No. But he's really fast. I don't care. Unless he's got 39-inch arms, it ain't happening. Right? So there's certain things like that, Ryan, that you have to. I got this great middle linebacker. He's 5'11", 185. Okay, then he's going to be a great Division III linebacker because that's the kind of kids we would get, Ryan, at the Division III level. Like, people think that Division III kids are just these terrible football players, like, and including a lot of parents who are trying to send their kids to our schools. I mean, I've told you some funny stories about that. Yeah. Normally, we get kids who are outstanding football players. They just don't have the measurables. I told the story last week about the kid I had at Christopher Newport, Rob Rodriguez, elite athlete, got a tryout with the Kansas City Chiefs. He was 5'6", 155 pounds when he left our school. Just never going to be able to make it because he's just not big enough. There are linebackers that I've coached against and coached in my career at the Division III level, Ryan, that are 5'11", 210 pounds. And at the Division III level, they're phenomenal because it's not as big of players, which means their size doesn't get exposed, where at the Division I level, they just have no chance to play. They couldn't hold up. They couldn't physically hold up. It doesn't mean they're not phenomenal football players. So there are some measurables you have to look at that are going to be like, look, I watch kids film with you, but just so you know, we're not recruiting this kid. That you do before you dive into the film. That's just how it works at the college level. Now, I still like watching the film. I still think you're silly not to watch the film because at that point I'm saying, let's just watch the film anyway. Because maybe it's a kid you say, hey, look, is there any chance this kid would walk on? Because I'd love to have this kid. And it's just, I can't in good conscience give this kid a scholarship because of whatever measurable. But maybe this kid will walk on? Because I'd love to see, you know what I mean? But so you still watch the film, but a lot of times, sometimes you'll go into the film knowing like, hey, this isn't a guy that we're going to take. But I'm still going to watch the film because I just love watching film. But once all the other things check the boxes that they're at least the bare minimums of what you're looking for, then you dive into the film. And you decide, okay, this kid's not quite as good here or quite as long here. So what's going to determine Ryan, if I handed you the scouting card for Jaden Osbury, you looked at it at the time, it would have been like 6'1", 205 pounds.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Academics check. All right. I don't know though, man. You're talking about a kid that's a Mike linebacker at 6'1", 205. I don't know, man. All right, let's watch the film. And then about 5 clips and you're like, yep, okay, thank you. Sign me up. Right. I mean, so you have to be willing to watch the film to a degree and let the film tell you a story and then decide, okay, is a kid worth not like there are certain linebackers that if they didn't have Jaden Osbury's skill, that size would be really problematic for me. Right. But for him, it's not problematic for me. Because everything else is so good. And his frame is good enough to where he's going to be 225 when it's all said and done, 230 when it's all said and done. He'll be fine there. Yeah. So that's all part of the process for me, Ryan.
Yeah. I mean, obviously college and evaluation for like the NFL are completely different animals to your point, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't get a kid into school, you can't get a kid into school. I mean, I always used to like, obviously there's tangible things that draw me to a football player, whether that is accolades, whether it is just pure size and just kind of fits a profile from a physical perspective. Film always what comes first for me, though, just kind of in that respect. And obviously I'm in a different I'm in a different conversation than the guys that are recruiting them, right? But I always like to watch the film, and then after that, that's where I get the context, and I'm just giving my own personal perspective,
Right.
not the college or
Right.
department's perspective.
Because the question was about what would Notre Dame do, and as Ryan
Sure.
said, that's the process I laid out. But I think that's what's fascinating, though, Ryan. For like this in the scouting world, it's a different deal. For what you're doing, it's a different deal. But there's also no right or wrong answer. If you wanted to tell me, let me watch the film first, to then not create any biases in other areas, I wouldn't tell you you're wrong. I would say, no, you got to look at the info first. I won't tell you that. Because sometimes the film will tell you a story that's like, hey, I don't know what the other stuff is. We're going to have to figure it out. But my whole point is, as a recruiting director, I'm like, how are we properly using our time?
Sure.
And if I can save you 10 hours a week of film time for kids that we just have no chance of recruiting, then that's what I have to do. But I'm going to have scouts that are going to still say, okay, cool. But when I get home tonight, I'm popping this film in anyway, because I love watching film. So that's kind of what it boils down to. But Ryan's one of those guys. Ryan's a film junkie. Ryan just loves watching film. So, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. All right. Let's see here. Yes, we did not get to this. This one from Archer looked a little bit like the one that he asked earlier, so I just wanted to make sure. But yes.
Archer's question is, Notre Dame has landed legit dudes at quarterback in the 2023 and 2024 classes and is pushing for another in 2025. What level of success does Sam Hartman and eventually Kenny Minchie need to have to sustain that recruiting?
It's huge. I mean, look, to me, Ryan, Sam Hartman needs to be closer to what he was at Wake Forest than Jack Cohn or Ian Book from a production standpoint, to me. If his numbers look a lot like Jack Cohn's, and again, I thought Jack had a good year for Notre Dame for what he did. But, I mean, Sam Hartman's a guy that's averaged about 4,000 yards the last 2 years. And if he doesn't miss the Army game this year, he does average 4,000 yards the last 2 years.
Right.
Because if you look at at his numbers at Wake Forest, he threw for 3,700 yards this year, this past season, and he averaged 3,701, which was down from 4,228 the year before. But he averaged about 6 more yards per game. The difference is he played 14 games in 2021 because they also played in the ACC title game, and he played all 12 regular season games, the ACC title game, and the bowl game. But he missed the first game of this year with that heart issue that cost him some of fall camp and that game, that opener. So to me, if he comes out for Notre Dame after throwing, 77 touchdowns the last 2 years, and over 300 yards a game, and all of a sudden he's come Notre Dame and he's averaging like 235 yards a game, 240 yards a game. He throws 25 touchdowns. That's going to be like, wow, okay, you're really not a quarterback-friendly offense. So to me, he's got to be 3,500 plus. He's got to be 30 touchdowns or plus. He's got to be that kind of guy, in my opinion, Ryan, for it to have an impact. Because if his numbers look more like Ian Book and Jack Cohn's, then we're going to be in a situation where that's just who Notre Dame is. It doesn't matter who your quarterback is. Yep. And that's why I think his numbers this year, especially, you say eventually Minchie or Carr, sure, but it doesn't even get to that with some top quarterbacks in the 25 class if Hartman's not really productive. He doesn't have to be 4,000 yards, Ryan, but he's got to be like 3,500 and 30 plus touchdowns. I mean, and there's got to be some impressive games on a big stage. Like if he only throws for $175 against Central Michigan because he only plays 2 quarters, whatever, that's going to bring the numbers down a little bit. But he better have several 300-yard games or 290-plus yard games and some big-time performances. Those are things that I want to see.
Well, I think that the production matters so much for the quarterback position, especially moving forward, because you're talking about 2 new guys that are going to be calling the show for the quarterbacks, right? Mm-hmm. One is the developer in Gino Gaduli, and the other one is the play caller, guy that's running the offense, obviously, in Jared Parker. So I think that when you want to just kind of lay a foundation and say, hey, any preconceived notions you had of playing quarterback at the University of Notre Dame, this is new right now, right? This is a new era. We have a transfer quarterback coming in. We have young quarterbacks coming in that are really talented, Notre Dame is moving in a different direction from a production perspective. So I just think it's that perspective that you need to really change a little bit. Because if you do have that preconceived notion, if you're a 2025 or 2026 quarterback that's on the board for Notre Dame, you need to show that, like, hey, that was a great thing about great thing that Taz Williams said actually when he went to the Blue Gold game. He's a wide receiver, but I think it still counts in this conversation, is that he's talked about, man, like they were airing the ball out a little bit. I wasn't expecting that type of thing, right? So I think that showing the ability is going to be big time without question moving forward for the quarterback position.
Yep. All right. Good stuff. Let's see here, Ryan. This is fun. This is a fun one.
Jeff Luke says, who will be the first Notre Dame player on the cover of the NCAA football game?
I'm going to have some fun with it and say it's going to be CJ Carr.
Yeah,
that would be my prediction. Be CJ Carr. Because it's always a guy that's – now, here's something I'm curious about. With this NIL rule change where the players can now be compensated, you could have a player that is still there. Because the way it used to be, remember, Ryan, the cover guy would always be a guy that was leaving. The guy that was no longer in school, because you couldn't show their actual names. Like, they never had names of players. You had to change their names to Jimmy Clausen or whatever, right? I believe in 2014 they didn't have names on it. They were just fake. The names would be when you would recruit guys, right?
Yeah.
But there was never real names on it. But you can do that now, and you could have a current player. You're just going to have to pay him for being on the cover. So that could change things a little bit, and it won't always have to be a guy that is departed, because I mean that's just a different animal.
Sam Hartman wins the Heisman this year, and he's on the cover of NCAA 2024. There we go. There's the prediction.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's go with that. Let's go with that. All right. I'm actually trying to pull something up here real quick, Ryan. So, but that's a fun question. All right. Here's another one.
Tommy said, rank these 3 traits: speed, versatility, length. Then which 2 or 3 do you prefer in each position group? Tommy, these are such long questions, man. Yeah. I mean, what 3 traits? I mean, we would have to go position by position, because these would all change depending on what position we're talking about. Like, length at the quarterback position doesn't matter to me unless he is too long. I mean,
well, let's substitute height and length depending on the position, because I do think height can be a factor that you're going to consider at positions where maybe length isn't as important, like a quarterback, for example. But then height's going to be a factor. It's not going to be a determining factor. But like, if I got 2 quarterbacks that are very similar in skill set and everything's similar, one guy's 6'4", one guy's 5'11", I'm taking the 6'4" guy. Like, the 5'11" guy's got to definitely be better than the 6'4" guy for me to take the 5'11" guy. I mean, that's still in the similar category. So I think if you were to say that, Ryan, then you could factor into it. But if I had to ask you big picture, however it would be nuanced from position to position, then rank those 3 things. In your opinion, and does it change from college to NFL? Because I think it does. I think it changed from college to NFL.
I mean, it can. I think it really is dependent on position, though. I mean, if it's just a blanket, though, I would say speed, length, and versatility for me. Because for me, versatility is nice to have, but it's not a necessity. As a coach, I am designed to put a player in a position to be successful. So if that's only one position to be successful, that's fine. If it's multiple ways to be successful, cool. That makes you more valuable. If you are able to affect a game in multiple ways, that's fantastic, but it's not a necessarily necessity. I think that speed and length are both so similar to me, Tommy, at certain positions, because speed and length are ways to make up for that margin for error, right? Ability to have a little bit more range as a football player, whether that's playing outside your frame as an offensive lineman, whether that's being rangy on the second level as a linebacker working to the sideline, whether that's a corner that has to turn and flip and run and has to have makeup speed or length to reach and be able to disrupt the pass. Like, I just think that those things are very interrelated. I guess I'll go with speed more than length, because I think that having true game-breaking speed and having to harness it is a little more rare than having length, in my opinion. So it's a little bit more of a rare trait, in my opinion. So I would go speed, length, and then versatility for me.
I'm looking some stuff up here that's pretty interesting that somebody brought up. I didn't know that this was happening today. I'll talk about it here in a second. Nathan Milton here, Ryan, with another one.
Nathan says, can the way Sam Hartman go through reads be taught? Yes, Nathan, it can be taught.
Sure.
Sam Hartman's going into his 6th year of college, right? So he's been playing high school ball. He's been playing college ball for a long time. There's a lot of reps, a lot of passes. He's playing a lot of football, 110 career touchdown passes. So the ability to go through reads, there's some ability to see the field. That's a natural thing. But to go through reads, that's natural progression. That's muscle memory. 1, 2, 3. Where are you going with the football on this particular concept? The ability to read pre and post snap as far as what coverages that you're seeing that determine those reads. So you can absolutely get better at those things. Those things are just like this innate thing that you just know and you can't improve upon. Guys can get better and more crisp with going through the reads without question.
Yeah, I think you made the right point there. Not every kid can get good at that, but you can teach it. Every kid can improve in reading a defense, but some kids who are bad at it are just going to always be bad. Like Kyle Buller couldn't not read a defense because he had bad coaching his whole life. Matter of fact, he had great coaching in college. He just wasn't an accurate fast processor or an accurate thrower. And that wasn't getting fixed. So otherwise, every kid that played for X quarterback would be phenomenal, because that's kind of the way that it would go. So, yeah. So some people are talking about 247 dropped their new rankings today.
Oh, fun.
So I'm just looking at some of these and finding some fun hilariousness to it. So Leonard Moore, some of these guys that didn't change. So CJ Carr is basically the same. Aeneas Williams dropped out of the top 247. Cam Williams went up a spot. Jack Larson was originally, here's what I'm trying to figure out. Jack Larson was originally in April, as late as November, was a 4-star and the number 47 player in the country, according to 247 Sports. Now, Jack Larson is a 3-star and the number 27 tight end in the country.
Man, he must have been doing terrible on those on that 7-on-7 route, I guess.
Is he even playing 7-on-7?
Carson said that he plays a lot of 7-on-7. So
Jack
I guess
does?
that's it. Yeah.
Okay. There's no way in heck a kid is playing that bad in 7-on-7. That's just stupid.
Yes.
So let's see. Peter Jones was always a 3-star. I'm going to see kind of where he went down on this. There's not a ton of movement with these guys, to be completely honest with you. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go through these a little bit. Give me a second, Ryan. So like I said, Leonard Moore, still a 3-star, went down a spot.
Nice.
You see what they did with some of these guys, like after the guys have committed to Notre Dame. Some of these guys would be very interesting to see what some of these guys do. They still have Owen Wafel as a 3-star. I find that one to be – I just don't see how you can watch that kid. And first of all, it's stupid that they still rank him as an edge. Did you know that? Yeah. They still rank him as an edge. Like, who on this planet watches Owen Wafel and thinks he's a defensive end?
He barely played defensive end as a junior as well.
Exactly. So they had him as the number 20 edge. He's the number 21 edge now, so his ranking hasn't really changed. I mean, if it's a spot or two, it's basically the same thing. Let's see what they think of Bryce Young compared to where he was before. Let me find Bryce because I've got in our profiles, we have all what their most recent ranking was. So Bryce Young dropped a spot. It's, normal. And they called it a tweak, not a full release. Let me find where they still have Isaiah Canyon ranked criminally low, Ryan. This is just so stupid. They have Isaiah Canyon as the number 56 receiver in the country and the number 45 player in the state of Georgia.
It's a good receiver class, man.
Yeah, it's an insane receiver class. So I think that one's just really dumb. Let me see where they had Isaiah Canyon before. It's probably in about the same spot. Number 55 receiver, so he dropped a spot. So, I mean, that's what most of these are, is just like a spot. They dropped Micah Gilbert from 199 overall to 217. That's one of those ones that I'd say, okay, whatever. Some guys got reevaluated and went up. I don't lose sleep over that kind of drop unless it's just like a really, really steady drop. Kennedy Urlacher. Let's see where they have Kennedy. They have him as the number 73 safety. They had him as the number 73 safety. They had him as the number, see here, 96 safety before. So that's actually up. That's actually like up 23 spots at safety. So Kennedy went up. They had Cole Mullins as the number 57 edge and the number 88 player in the state of Georgia. Let's see here. Where do they have him before? They had him as the number 55 edge before. So they dropped him 2 spots. Whatever. Carson Hobbs is the number 43 corner now. And he was, let me find probably Carson here real quick. Right? Probably close. I mean, down a couple spots, most likely. Let's see. Where's Carson? All right. Carson Hobbs previously was ranked as the number 41 cornerback in the country. So he's dropped 2 spots, same, basically the same thing. Bodie Cahoon is, let me see. I'm pretty sure I did a commit profile for Bodie Cahoon. Let me just find it here real quick. I didn't link it, Ryan. I didn't link it to the page. It's screwing up. Bodie Cahoon was the number 52 linebacker in the country. Now he's number 54. So these are all like very minor changes. The only big change is Jack Larson's, which is just ridiculous.
Not Notre Dame commits, but apparently Chris Cole and Carter Nelson both went up crazy amounts. So
gotcha. Yeah, wait till they commit.
Seriously,
I'm joking, they're not going to commit to Notre Dame, but yeah, it's I'm curious where they have Logan Thomas now as well. Give me a second. Where is he ranked now? Not the same. I think he was like
right?
186 before. Now he's like 182.
Okay.
So he's pretty much the same. So yeah, we'll see. It's going to be interesting, but it's a minor. They even, like I saw the front page release, they called it a tweak. That probably means what that probably means, Ryan, is there was a few guys that they didn't have ranked high or didn't have ranked that they've seen, and they wanted to boost them up, and so they're just having a tweak is most likely.
Chris Cole is the number 65 player in the country now, number 6 linebacker. He went up 237 spots. Wow.
It's a lot of spots.
It's a lot of spots.
I like Chris Cole. I can't go quite that high for him yet. I have a feeling that has a lot more to do with who's recruiting him than it does anything else.
Probably.
So yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look through the rest of it. It's probably gonna be some silliness, most likely.
Carter Nelson up 83 spots, number 40 overall now.
Again, I like Carter Nelson. I think that's a little too high for now. But here's the thing though, but they have to somewhat figure out a way to include upside into these rankings because they don't have the upside grade like we do. So if you want to tell me you're putting Carter Nelson at number 40 because of the upside, okay. Mm-hmm. All right. I can live with that. I mean, he's a freaky athlete.
Yeah.
So I'd have no problem with that. I'd have no problem with that at all. So yeah, I'll look forward to it'll be interesting to look through it for sure. But
no doubt.
He's a really good player. He's a really good player. See here. Our Ohio State guy said Peyton Pierce dropped 26 spots. Ian Moore dropped 56 spots. Marquise Lightfoot jumped 163 spots. I do not see that one at all. Ryan, what are your thoughts on him? Because I know we have a little bit of a difference of opinion on him.
I mean, I like him. I think he's a top 250 type of kid. I'm not like, he shouldn't be a top 50 or 100 kid like he's being ranked as. But, I mean, he's got some raw traits to work with.
His lowest ranking is 133.
Wow.
Yeah, he's 2 of them have top 100. So either I'm wrong and Notre Dame is wrong on him, or other people are wrong because I just don't. I don't see it. This is my favorite part about this whole thing, though. Tyler says lots of spots when very little football has been played. Not even very little. No football has been played. 7-on-7 is not football. It's not real football. I
also don't think Chris Cole plays 7-on-7.
He's been to camps.
Yeah.
He's been to some camps. So that's what that's based. But I'm telling you, right, a lot of this is just, he's getting offered from so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so in the last 2 months. And,
sure.
And he's uncommitted. Like, there's no reason to jump up kids who are committed. It's the uncommitted kids.
Never forget that DeMello Jones went from a no-ranked player to a top 100 kid in like a month because of all his And
that's what it was. I mean, dude, he plays at Buford, correct?
Yeah.
You can't. No, not Buford. Where does he play? KJ Bolden's from Buford, but he goes to a big time school. Like
he does. Yeah,
the point is he doesn't go to some school we've never heard of. He goes to Swainsboro. He plays against very good competition. There's no way you didn't know who he was beforehand. Right. And so like I remember when Ryan first got on him, he was like, this kid's phenomenal. And I'm looking at his rankings. I'm like, what is going on?
I know,
like how is this kid a 3-star across the board? Well, now he's finally being the problem I have is fans will now view him differently when the reality is the kid's not changed at all. He always was this guy. It's just now it's whether or not he's being recognized for it. And that gets back to the original feeling about whether or not rankings do not define your talent. Sometimes your talent is recognized properly. Sometimes it is not. You're not defined by your star ranking.
Yep.
If I'm a 3-star talent and you swap a 4-star on me, I don't get better as a player.
Oh, you don't?
That's the reality of it. Yes. So anyway, so that's going to do it, Ryan. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here for today's show, man? We got 3 hours on the dot, wrapped up our mailbag. We're ready to get out of here.
Good timing for sure. And if you all had missed the conversation with Carson Hobbs for Carson's Corner, or you missed our quarterback talk, make sure you go back to listen to the beginning of this podcast. But we want to thank you all so much for joining the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Ryan Roberts, Brian Driscoll. Make sure before you leave, hit that like button, share the podcast, hit the notification bell. I saw someone early in the podcast say that they had not been getting the live shows, but then they subscribe to the podcast, and all of a sudden it goes magically right into their inbox. So please, make sure you hit that subscribe button. 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Go to boards.irishbreakdown.com for further team and recruiting intel. You also go to irishbreakdown.com if you want to see any of our free contact. So from the Irish Breakdown team, Ryan and Brian, we appreciate you all so much again for joining us on the Recruiting Hour on the Irish Breakdown podcast.